Chapter 309. Looking at the two familiar faces in front of him, Li Yi was shocked. Why were Li Xian's guards here? These two were Li Xian's godlike followers. Generally speaking, wherever Li Xian appeared, there would be their shadows. Could it be that the slightly familiar voice he heard just now was sure enough? When Li Yi thought of a certain possibility, an ecstatic face appeared in front of him. You've also come to the capital? There were 4 great joys in life. Rain after a long drought, meeting an old friend in a foreign land, wedding night, and getting a place in the imperial examinations. For Li Xian, wedding night was not a happy event. As the crown prince of Ningguang, his status was noble. There was no need for him to get a place in the imperial examinations. Only meeting an old friend in a foreign land could be considered an extreme joy. I'm originally from the capital. Do you know me, brother? Seeing the young man looking at him with a puzzled expression, Li Xian was a little stunned. After a closer look, he found that the other person's style of dressing was very different from before. In Li Yi's own words, he did not like to wear such showy clothes. His voice also seemed to be very different. Could it be that he had recognized the wrong person? Come to think of it, he had decisively rejected Mingzhu's invitation to come to the capital to become an official. 10 days ago, the two of them were still drinking and chatting merrily in the jadeite courtyard. Unless Li Yi set foot on the road to the capital as soon as he left Qing and prefecture, it would be impossible to see him here. But in this world, were there really 2 people who looked so similar? May I know this brother's name? I'm Li Yi. Li Yi cupped his hands in salute. An actor's self-cultivation. The basics of dramatic performance. An actor's learning manual. Li Yi, at this moment, felt like he was possessed by the best actor. If he worked hard, it was not impossible for him to win an Oscar. As for changing one's voice, the art of changing one's appearance and voice was an essential skill in the martial arts world. With just a little bit of skill, one could become a qualified voice actress. Li Xian no longer doubted his identity. After all, if it was really Li Yi, it was impossible for him not to recognize him. At this moment, he began to be interested in this person called Li Ming. Their appearances were more than 90% similar, and they were both surnamed Li. If it was said that the two of them didn't have any relationship, he wouldn't believe it even if he was beaten to death. Could it be that this person called Li Ming was Li Yi's twin brother? Li Xian, who thought he had discovered a great secret, immediately forgot all his worries and asked curiously, "Do you know someone called Li Yi? He looks almost exactly like you. Are you from Qing'an Prefecture and know my elder brother?" The young man looked at him with surprise. "Haha, I know, of course I know." Li Xian laughed and said, "I really didn't think that Li Yi would actually have a younger brother that looks exactly like him. This is so fun." Li Yi sighed in his heart. With Li Xian's intelligence, to be able to live peacefully until he was 20 years old, he must have accumulated a lot of good karma in his previous life. He didn't plan to reveal his identity now. Before he realized it, he could still have 2 days of leisure. At this moment, a guard walked over and said in a low voice, "Your Highness, the Crown Prince's consort is coming." Li turned around and saw a group of people walking over. "Haha, I'm afraid I won't have the chance today. Li Ming, right? When I'm free, I'll find you for a drink." Li Xian laughed and strode forward. As long as he knew his name, investigating him was a very easy matter. The Crown Prince's consort? He saw a group of maids surrounding a woman with a curtain as she walked over. The woman's figure was not bad, but as for what she looked like, it was covered by a layer of white gauze, so he couldn't see it clearly. Li Xian hadn't been in the capital for long. It seemed that his marriage had only happened a few days ago. It was said that his Crown Prince's consort was the legitimate daughter of a wealthy family in the Jing Kingdom. Her status was incomparably noble, and she was also an outstanding beauty. However, the two of them didn't stick together all day long during their honeymoon period. Li Xian, this fellow, was discussing the problem of worry with the old monk. Could it be that the couple's life was not harmonious? If that was the case, finding the old monk would be useless. He should go find an old Chinese doctor. "Husband, have you seen Grandmaster Sandalwood Yin?" Li Xian walked over with a smile on his face, and a light voice came from the veil. Li Xian nodded and said, "Great Master Tan Yin is well versed in Buddhism. and is worthy of being an enlightened monk. I have benefited a lot from talking with the great master. Husband's complexion is very good. I presume that the great master has already dispelled husband's doubts. Ling Long, before you leave, double the amount of incense in the temple. The woman's voice was soft. A mate beside her immediately nodded in agreement. Since you've finished offering incense and paying respects to the Buddha, let's return early. After saying this, Li Xian walked forward with large strides. The lips of the woman in the curtain moved, but in the end, she didn't say the words of appreciating the plum blossoms together. She let out a long sigh and said, "Let's go." The luxurious carriage slowly descended along the mountain path. Dozens of guards surrounded the carriage. Inside the carriage, the woman who had already taken off the curtain sat upright on the brocade couch. She looked out the window at the young man who would rather ride a horse than ride in the same carriage as her. Her eyes were slightly lowered, and her fair hands tightly gripped the hem of her dress. I wonder what expression Emingzu would have if she knew that Li Yi has a brother who looks exactly like him. Li Xian rode on the horse with a strange smile on his face. "Your Highness." A guard rode a horse and whispered as he caught up to him. "What is it?" Li Xian turned to look at him. "Just now at Cold Mountain Temple." The guard hesitated for a moment and said, "I think I saw Miss Rui." "Miss Rui?" Li Xian raised his brows. "Which Miss Rui?" Then, as if he suddenly thought of something, he pulled on the reins of the horse and asked, "Are you talking about Mississippi Lu?" "Maybe I saw wrongly. Maybe they just look alike," the guard said after thinking for a moment. It was a coincidence if it happened once, but it was inevitable if it happened twice. An excited expression appeared on Li Xian's face. He pointed at a few people and said, "The few of you, follow me up the mountain. The rest of you, escort the crown princess back to the residence." A few clouds of dust disappeared from the mountain path. Inside the carriage, the woman revealed a disappointed expression. She put down the curtain and said, "Let's go." Li Yi was looking at the old monk in front of him with a vigilant expression. In just the blink of an eye, the old monk had appeared in front of him. It was enough to show that the old monk was an expert. At the very least, he couldn't beat him. When I pointed at the plum tree just now, I meant to say that a moment of suffering is nothing and that there will be a day of happiness after suffering. Just like what the benefactor said. The old monk looked at Li Yi with a smile and asked, "Young benefactor, how could you have such a misunderstanding?" Li Yi understood that the old monk might be unhappy with his interruption just now. This was not a joke on the internet in the future, but a real Zen master. When facing a real Zen master, he naturally couldn't just casually make up a joke to deal with it. Li Yi's expression turned serious, and then he smiled mysteriously. He looked at the old monk and said, "The Buddha said it can't be said, it can't be said." After saying that, he elegantly turned around and strode back in the direction from where he came. The old monk was stunned on the spot. After a long time, a smile appeared on his old face. He looked at the direction in which Li Yi left and said, "All appearances are fabricated. Worry is also empty and worry is also empty. I was too obsessed with appearances. Young benefactor, you have great wisdom." Chapter 310. He pulled out a line in Buddhist language that he had heard from somewhere, and he didn't know if it was Buddhist language or not. In any case, that line, which he didn't understand but felt awesome, had frightened the old monk. Taking advantage of the fact that he hadn't recovered his wits, he hurriedly ran away. Who knew whether or not he would use the 1,000-leaf palm of great compassion and great compassion to strike him when he woke up. Cold Mountain Temple was not small, with innumerable halls and pavilions. The old madam seemed to be listening to some famous monk preach the scriptures. For a moment, he didn't know where Rui and the others had gone. So Li Yi decided to just stroll around the temple. The temple fair would last for 3 days. In these 3 days, there was an endless stream of visitors to Cold Mountain. There were believers who came to pray to Buddha and burn incense, as well as young men and women who came solely to admire the plum blossoms. The sharp-witted peddlers had long since grasped this opportunity, and had long since found a spot at the top of the mountain, selling little trinkets like combs, wooden tablets, and so on. They claimed that these items were treasures that had been consecrated by the high monks of Cold Mountain Temple. 10 copper coins couldn't buy them. 10 copper coins couldn't buy them. And 10 copper coins naturally couldn't buy a comb either. Treasures personally consecrated by the high monks were not for sale for less than 1 copper coin. In addition, there was naturally no lack of people selling food. On a plaza far away from the plum blossom forest, a space had been cleared out. Peddlers carrying poles stood next to each other, loudly shouting steamed buns and noodles. They were not allowed to go to the plum blossom forest, saying that it would spoil the mood of those nobles. Any young master or young lady there was not someone they could afford to offend. A chubby boy dressed in embroidered clothes ran out of the plum blossom forest, huffing and puffing. He threw down a handful of silver, and in a short while he ran into the forest with a large pile of food. Under a plum tree, a little girl of about 7 or 8 raised her head in anticipation. "Little candy eat." The chubby boy ran over, panting heavily, and placed all the things he had bought on the white cloth on the ground. "Thank you, big brother," the little girl said sweetly. She first picked up a piece of candied plum and gave it to the chubby boy. Then she sat down and began to eat. There were quite a few children of this age in the forest. They came out with their families, so it was impossible for them to quietly chant sutras and worship Buddha with the adults. In order to prevent them from making noise in the temple, most families would let their servants watch over them, and let them play by themselves in the plum blossom forest. At this moment, there were a few servants standing behind the 2 children. Seeing the 2 young masters eating quietly, they began to chat. "Hey Fatty Lee, you are here too." A few youths dressed in embroidered clothes quickly surrounded them, as if they had discovered a new continent. The little fatty's expression changed at first, then he puffed out his chest and said, "Chin Shoutian, I don't want to fight with you today. Why are you eating every time I see you? I think you might as well not call yourself Li Inkai, call yourself Pigly instead." The few of them clearly had enmity with each other. The youth in embroidered clothes looked at the things on the white cloth and sneered. "Sure enough, it's Fat Pigly. I'm afraid only pigs would eat these things." "Big brother." The little girl nervously grabbed onto the corner of the little fatty's clothes. "Pigly, is this your sister? I thought everyone in your family was as fat as you." The youth in embroidered clothes laughed out loud. He suddenly ran over and fiercely stepped on the food on the white cloth. He pulled the little girl's face and pointed to the ground, saying, "This is the real pig's feed." How could a child bear such humiliation? The little fatty only felt his blood rushing to his head, and he punched the chest of the youth in embroidered clothes. "You dare to make a move, hit him." The youth in embroidered clothes seemed to be waiting for this moment. After avoiding the punch, he immediately shouted. Several youths behind him immediately swarmed up and pressed the little fatty to the ground. The little girl on the side was so scared that she cried out. The faces of several servants changed. Just as they were about to come over and pull them away, they were blocked by a few people who had been following behind the youth in embroidered clothes. There were many figures in the plum forest. Many people saw the scene here. Seeing that it was just a few children playing, they didn't take it to heart. "Hey, Fatty Lee, as long as you call me Grandpa, I'll let you go. How about it?" The youth in embroidered clothes squatted down and patted the little fatty's face. "Call you Grandpa?" The little fatty had the advantage in size. He suddenly turned over and broke free from the few youths behind him. With a tiger pounce, he pressed the youth in embroidered clothes under his body. "Only when I'm full will I have the strength to beat you." With a loud shout, he clenched his fist and punched the youth in embroidered clothes. In the end, his fist didn't land on the face of the youth in embroidered robes. A young man grabbed his arm from behind and threw him to the side. He helped the pale-faced youth in embroidered robes up and said in a flattering manner, "Young master, are you all right?" Many people around frowned. A few children playing was nothing, but this young man attacking a child was a bit too much. "Catch him for me." Just now he was almost beaten by Li Inkai. The youth in embroidered clothes had a pale face. He was so angry that he stomped his feet and said to the young man, "Stop." The few servants of the little fatty were firmly blocked and could not rush over. They could only shout anxiously. Looking at the man walking towards him, the little fatty rubbed his bruised wrist and stood up with the help of a tree. He stared at the man with an unyielding expression. "Who are they? How can they be so domineering in the cold mountain temple? Someone around asked doubtfully. Lower your voice. That is the young master of Duke Chen's family. The little fatty is called Li Yingkai. He should be the younger generation of Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Personnel. No wonder. These two families have been feuding for more than 10 years. However, it is a bit too shameless for a man to attack a child. That should be High Duke Chen's bodyguards. Little fatty only has a few servants who don't know martial arts. He's definitely going to suffer this time. However, it's just a joke between the younger generation. It won't be a big deal. Originally, there were a few people who disliked the man's behavior. After hearing that he was from Duke Chen's family, they immediately stopped talking. For most people, these words still carried a lot of weight. The little fatty gritted his teeth. When he saw the man's hand reach over, he was about to rush over. However, a hand reached out from behind him and grabbed the man's wrist. With a gentle shake, the man fell to the ground holding his arm and could not get up. At the same time, he felt someone pat him on the shoulder, and a voice came from behind him. If you are being bullied, fight back yourself. The little fatty turned around and looked at the familiar figure. After a moment of shock, he shouted and rushed towards the youth in embroidered robes. The youth in embroidered robes wanted to run, but his reaction was a beat too slow. Soon he was once again pounced on by the little fatty. The surrounding youths quickly rushed over to help, but they were unable to stop the little fatty's fist from landing on the youth in embroidered robes' face. The faces of the men blocking the little fatty's servants changed. Just as they were about to step forward, they saw the young man walking towards them. Let the children deal with their own matters. We should not interfere. Get out of my way, one of the men said impatiently. Just as he was about to walk past the young man, his body flew backwards in the next moment. So there is no room for discussion? The young man looked at the men who were looking at him warily, and the smile on his face disappeared. Chapter 311. Just now Li Yi's view of this little fatty who was always thinking about eating changed. He knew that he was no match for him, but he was still unyielding. When fighting, he still remembered to protect the little girl behind him. It was hard to tell that this little fatty, who was a little hot-blooded, was actually the son of his third uncle, who was always indifferent no matter what happened. Even if the world was destroyed, it would have nothing to do with him. The grudges between children should be solved by them in their own way. It was fair no matter who won or lost. There was no need for these lackeys to intervene. You're courting death. Seeing that the young man kicked one of their people away, the remaining 4 guards were immediately furious. One of them went around to help the young man in embroidered clothes, while the other 3 surrounded Li Yi. The 2 people that were dealt with just now, one was a trick, and the other was a surprise attack. Among the remaining 3, one of them gave him a little pressure. Even if he could deal with them, he would not feel good. At the very least, he would have to take a few punches and kicks. Li Yi was not prepared to be beaten. He looked at the young man who was watching the show with his arms crossed and asked, "How long are you going to watch?" Bang! The man walking towards the little fatty was sent flying by Li Xian's bodyguard with a kick. Li Xian walked over with a playful look in his eyes. He looked at him and said, "I couldn't tell that brother Li Ming actually had such skills." Li Yi looked puzzled. "You've seen my brother?" Li Xian's footsteps paused, and the expression on his face began to become suspicious. "Who are you people? How dare you interfere in my business?" Seeing that one of their own people was sent flying, and this guy who came out of nowhere treated them as nothing, one of the 3 people, who was obviously a bit tough and irritable, said angrily. Even though the capital was full of nobles, the Chen public house could be considered as a giant. Except for the imperial family and a few families that couldn't be provoked, it was basically an existence that could do whatever it wanted. Don't look at this big man's rough appearance. He was able to stay close to the young master and protect him. He had never heard that the Li family had any powerful backing. Not to mention that the people in front of him were very unfamiliar. They were not the families that they couldn't afford to offend, so what was there to worry about? Your father? Li looked at the man in surprise and gave him a thumbs up in his heart. Daring to call himself lousy in front of Prince Ning's crown prince. Was this guy trying to rebel and become Prince Ning himself? The royal family cared a lot about their dignity. Being disrespectful to the emperor was a serious crime that could result in beheading. This person dared to call the emperor brother, so he was a good man with courage. Jing Ke could be considered as a courageous man, but in the end he was chopped into pieces by Emperor Qin Shi Huang. There were so many courageous men on Mount Liang, but in the end, all of them were wiped out. Since the ancient times, all the courageous men were now dead. From this, it could be seen that hot-blooded men usually did not have a good ending. Not long after the man said the word lousy, he was slapped in the face by one of Li Xian's guards, causing him to spit out all his teeth. By the time the other two reacted, their shoulders had already been pressed down, and they couldn't move at all. Break their legs. The leader of Li Xian's guards made the decision on his own. Don't you dare. We are from the house of Hai Duke Chen. Both of their legs were about to be broken. If they didn't raise the flag now, it would be too late. Usually, when they bullied others, most of them would just give them a beating. Even when they were dealing with those insignificant lords, they wouldn't break their legs. This was an act that completely shed all pretense of cordiality. When the leader of the guards heard this, he turned and looked at Li Xian. In the next moment he turned back and said to the guards, "Since they are from the house of Hai Duke Chen, just break one of their legs." In order not to disturb the atmosphere of people admiring the flowers, and to be a civilized person, the guards decided to drag them out of the peach forest and break their legs. At this time, the outcome of the fight with the little fatty had also been decided. It had to be said that when it came to fighting, the fatty had a natural advantage. The four youths had lived a luxurious life since they were young. They probably hadn't put in much effort to practice martial arts. They only used simple punches and kicks. If the strength was light, hitting the little fatty's body was like scratching an itch. However, if they were hit by the little fatty's fist, they could only squat on the ground and cry. There was no other outcome. In a short while, the four youths were all knocked to the ground. The little fatty crawled up from the ground and panted heavily. He patted the dust off his body, completely ignoring his bruised and swollen face. He looked down at the four defeated youths and said loudly, "Didn't you want to fight? Get up." If he pointed to the sky and shouted, "Who else?" He was afraid that he would be struck by lightning if he acted so pretentiously. Hearing this, the few youngsters in embroidered clothes crawled up from the ground and quickly ran out of sight. "This is..." Li Xian pointed at the little fatty who looked like the leader of the martial arts world. Li shook his head and said, "We'll talk about this later." "Young master." Only then did the servants have time to run over. When they saw the little fatty's sorry state, they were about to cry. "I'm fine." The little fatty wiped his snot. Although his body was in great pain, his heart was sweeter than eating candied fruit. He ran to the little girl's side and held her hand, saying, "The delicious food is all dirty. Big brother will buy it for you later." A servant walked to Li Yi worriedly and said, "Young master, those are the sons of Hai Duke Chen's family. Young master beat them up. We're in big trouble." "Hai Duke Chen?" Li Yi looked at him and asked, "If it wasn't for today's incident, would they have caused less trouble for the Li family?" The servant was speechless for a moment. Young master's words seemed to make sense. The Chen and Li family had been at odds for more than 10 years. The Chen family had been intentionally or unintentionally suppressing the Li family for so many years. It could be said that the Chen family had a lot to do with the Li family's rapid decline. Hai Duke. There were only a few Hai Dukes in a country. The small Li family obviously couldn't afford to offend a first-class duke, but someone could. Li Yi turned to look at Li Xian and asked, "Can we afford to offend Hai Duke Chen?" Li Xian didn't seem to hear Li Yi's words. He looked at the little fatty, then looked at Li Yi and murmured, Young master, when did you have a son like this?" It seemed like he could afford to offend them. Li Yi felt that this world was quite unfair. They both had the surname Li, but why was there such a big difference? When the Li family was at its peak, there was still a big gap between them and the Chen family. The two families could have been on good terms, but in the end, the daughter of the Hai Duke was abandoned. It was no different from a slap in the face to the Chen family. Since then, the two families became enemies, and they went down the road of love and hate. Even if Li Xian didn't appear today, he would still stand up for the little fatty. First, as a member of the Li family, he couldn't watch him get bullied by others. Second, the reason why the Chun and Li families were in such a situation today was entirely because of his stubborn father. Li Yi felt very wronged. He didn't do many bad things in his previous life. He just didn't dare to help an old lady who fell, picked up some money on the street, and casually spent it. He didn't offend anyone. He transmigrated peacefully, but he somehow got involved in the fight of the pugilistic world and family disputes. Whatever he did, there would be people who opposed him. Even if he didn't do anything, there would be people who wanted to step on him. Wasn't it good to live a good life? If he had transmigrated into Dazhuang and Dazhuang's body, there wouldn't have been so many messy things, right? It was only the second day he came to the capital, and he already offended a high duke. Fortunately, he had that brother's godly assistance. With one sentence, he also dragged the royal family into the matter. Even if the servant's leg was broken, the Chun family probably wouldn't have the guts to find trouble with Li Xian. It was very likely that they would specially visit him to apologize. As for the Li family, it didn't matter if there were too many lice. After so many years of grudges, it didn't matter if there was another one. On the contrary, because of today's matter, if they wanted to find trouble with the Li family in the future, they might have to think twice. Li Yi felt that he was about to become a schemer. This damned society. In just half a year, a good young man of the 21st century had been forced into such a state. Feudalism was killing people. Just as Li Yi was sighing because of this, a group of people walked over from the entrance of the plum blossom forest in a grandiose manner. The ones walking in front were obviously the few youths with snot and tears running down their faces covered in bruises. Chapter 312. Behind the young men in embroidered clothes, the guards who were acting violently just now were now being carried by others. They were wailing incessantly, and one of their legs was bent at a strange angle. Li Xian's guards walked over from behind and stood quietly behind him. Their faces regained their calm expression, as if they were not the ones who broke someone's leg just now. At this time, the difference between professional guards and non-professionals was reflected. Li Yi once again realized the importance of bringing a few reliable bodyguards when he went out. People like Mississippi Liu, who were always missing at critical moments, would definitely starve to death in this line of work. Brother Li Qing, it's them. The leading young man in embroidered clothes pointed at Li Yi and the others, and said loudly to the young man beside him. After saying that, he gritted his teeth and looked at the little fatty opposite him, who had his head held high and chest out, as if his eyes were about to spit fire. It's just child's play. Don't you think you've gone too far by doing this? The young man walked forward and looked at Li Yi with a frown. As he spoke, he was also sizing up the people opposite him. In the capital city, he knew all the young men of similar age with a background. He even met a few of the emperor's princes a few times. These two people obviously did not belong to any of them. However, they dared to ignore High Duke Chen's residence. The dignity of a High Duke was only worth a leg in their eyes. If they did not really have a powerful background, then they were lunatics. However, before figuring out the identity of the other party, he would not go too far. He first tried to sound them out. Seeing that the other party was frowning and looking at him as if he wanted to seek justice for those people, Li Yi sighed in his heart. This was how the world was. The right was always in the hands of the few, the rich and the powerful. When he tried to reason with them, they insisted on using force. When they lost to Li Xian's guards in terms of force, they turned around and tried to reason with him. This was not the way to bully people, right? All the young masters and young mistresses present can testify that our young master clearly said just now that the children's affairs will be dealt with by themselves and did not intervene in the quarrel between the young masters. However, your family's guards actually bullied the young. I'm afraid that this is damaging to the dignity of High Duke Chen, isn't it? The servants of the Li family also felt that the young man was distorting the truth. Those people's legs were broken, but what did it have to do with their young master? It was obvious that they were blind and offended that young master, which caused the disaster. The Li family was not going to take the blame. Not bad. Indeed. The surrounding young masters and young ladies nodded in agreement. Although it was unreasonable for the young master to allow the little fatty to fight with a few children, he still knew his limits. On the other hand, Duke Chen's guard actually disregarded his status and attacked a child. It was a little too shameless. Moreover, in the beginning, it was the few kids from High Duke Chen's family who provoked them first. The little fatty was not weak at all. After what happened just now, he had already won a good impression in everyone's hearts. As for the bodyguards who had their legs broken, they had only themselves to blame. How could someone who could bring so many powerful bodyguards with him be an ordinary person? The house of High Duke Chen might be a colossus in the eyes of ordinary people, but what kind of place was the capital? There might not be many people who did not respect the house of High Duke Chen, but a few bodyguards who relied on their master's power would not be taken seriously. Feeling the gazes from the surrounding people, the young man felt a little embarrassed. He said, "Even if they are in the wrong, isn't it too cruel to break people's legs so easily?" Li Yi realized that this guy seemed to have set his sights on him. From the beginning to the end, he only broke one person's arm and sent another flying with a kick. The person who broke their legs was standing behind Li Xian. Every injustice had its perpetrator, and every debt had its debtor. If he had the ability, he could go and find them. What was the logic of always coming after him? Moreover, what was so cruel about breaking a person's leg? That guy wanted to be Li Xian's father and be brothers with the emperor. It was already benevolent of His Highness that he was not beaten to death. Even if he went up and slapped Li Xian twice or kicked him twice, his crime would be much lighter than calling himself father in front of him. In the end, there were still people who were reasonable. A guard with a broken leg couldn't help but point at Li Xian's group and said, "Young Master Cheng, our injuries were done by those people." Chen Liqing had the thought of personally breaking his other leg. Damn it, can't you just say it all at once? After talking for so long, you haven't even found the culprit. Are you kidding me? At this moment, he was also secretly cursing his bad luck. Why couldn't they just stay at home? Why did they have to bring a few friends to the cold mountain temple to enjoy the plum blossoms? What was even worse was that they had brought the little devil of their family. He was just an ordinary collateral family member of the Chen family. He had neither money nor status. The little devil in front of him with purple eye sockets was the treasure of the Chen family. If he didn't handle it well today, he wouldn't be able to explain himself when he went back. Why don't we go to the temple and find a place to sit? Li Xian turned his head to look at Li Yi and suggested. Li Yi agreed with his idea very much. It didn't feel good to stand here and be stared at like a monkey. The naughty kid's face was bruised, and he had to find a place to apply some medicine. Stop. Seeing that the two people seemed to be really planning to leave, Chen Liqing stepped forward and said loudly, "Don't you think you owe us an explanation? What do you want? Just say it." Li Xian pointed at a few guards. They understood and stepped forward to stand in front of the crowd. Li Xian looked at them and said impatiently, "Do you want to come one by one or all at once?" Arrogant, too arrogant. This was the most intuitive feeling of Chen Liqing and the men behind him. That person looks gentle, like someone who has been educated. How can he be so rude? Let's sit down and talk. If the other party also has a strong background, we just need to apologize and symbolically break a few legs. Both of us will have face, and the matter will be solved perfectly. Do we have to fight? All the guards who have martial arts on their side have their legs broken. How can a few scholars fight with those people? Aren't they courting death? Compared to Chen Liqing and the others, the surrounding people felt differently. Especially the eyes of the young women under the veil, they were all quietly glowing. The surrounding crowd naturally had to stand on the side of truth. High Duke Chen's servants used their power to bully others. Chen Liqing was just continuing to be vicious. As for the two young masters, they were obviously in the right. Of course, the most important thing was that the two of them were really handsome. Humph, we are scholars. How can we be like those boorish people in the mountains? Chen Liqing snorted coldly. A disdainful expression appeared on his face, covering the fear just now. He said, "Why don't we have a civil battle? If you win, we will let bygones be bygones. If we win, you need to personally apologize, and the person who attacked just now will have to break one of his legs. How about that?" Chen Liqing wasn't stupid enough to use his shortcomings to compete with others' strengths. They were all scholars, so they should use a more refined method. It was better to recite poems and write essays. As for fighting, it was simply a disgrace to scholars. After they left, they would investigate their background. If the two of them didn't have any background, they would definitely regret being born into this world. Civil battle? Hearing this, Li Xian thought for a while and decisively shook his head. Too troublesome. Let's have a martial battle. Why don't we only send out 2 people, and all of you come together? Chapter 313. As the saying goes, when a scholar meets a soldier, he cannot be reasoned with. That was how Chen Liqing felt. The person in front of them was clearly a scholar, but he did not follow the rules of a scholar. He was determined to fight with force instead of words. The other party's bodyguard was obviously an expert that had been carefully selected. Even if there were only 2 of them, the few of them were definitely not a match for them. Only an idiot would agree to a physical fight. Li Xian frowned and looked like he was in a hurry. He said impatiently, "Fine, if you want a literary fight, then so be it. What are the rules?" Seeing that the person in front of him was finally being reasonable, Chen Liqing was overjoyed. He said, "It's simple. It's the season for plum blossoms, and we're in the middle of a plum forest. Why don't we use plum blossoms as the theme and compose a poem? Let everyone here judge who is better. This is a literary fight." With that, he whispered to the person beside him, "Hurry and invite young Master Shen over. It's your turn." Li Xian crossed his arms and glanced at Li Yi. Once again, he looked like he was watching a good show. The ball went around in a circle and returned to Li Yi. There's no need for a literary fight. Li Yi was more inclined to Li Xian's suggestion. What couldn't be solved with 1 fist? If not, then 2 fists. Clean and efficient, without the slightest hesitation. If Mississippi Lu was here, she would have done this long ago. After spending so much time with her, it was inevitable that she would influence the way she did things. Haha, if you're afraid, you can just admit defeat. Chen Liqing smiled and said, "You only need to apologize in person and break the hands and feet of those who attacked you. Then we can forget about this. What do you think?" After seeing the other party's hesitation, Chen Liqing was even more certain that they were just 2 idiots. The last bit of worry in his heart disappeared. See, if they don't want to, then there's nothing to talk about. Li Xian said with a hint of schadenfreude. The scholars of Qing and Prefecture had already been harmed by him. The mere mention of the name Li Yi would make one's heart tremble. He was very happy to see the same thing happen in the capital. Only then would it be fair. Whispers of discussion could be heard from the surroundings. This Chen Liqing is also a genius with a little bit of fame, but he doesn't know right from wrong and acts shamelessly. Today has really opened my eyes. The people around him are all famous talents in the capital. In terms of poetry, how could those 2 young masters possibly compete with him? Look, he even invited young Master Shen here. Could it be that, although young Master Shen hasn't been in the capital for long, he made a name for himself during the Lantern Festival, using his poetry to win over most of the scholars? I heard that he intends to curry favor with the Chen family. Looks like Chen Liqing really doesn't care about his reputation anymore in order to win. Even though the surrounding scholars and young ladies were mostly standing on the side of Li Yi and Li Xian, they didn't think that they would be able to win. How could 2 nameless people compare to those outstanding scholars? What's more, there was a top talent like young Master Shen holding the fort. Does it hurt? Li Yi wiped the dust off the fatty's face and asked. No. Even though he grimaced in pain from being touched, he only breathed in and out, but he didn't admit it at all. He patted his chest and said, "This kid has some backbone." When the fatty showed off his prowess, Li Xian was also there. He walked over and patted his shoulder. Hearing the compliments, the fatty puffed out his chest even more. He held the young lady's hand like a victorious rooster. "Brother Shen, you're here." When a young man walked over, Chen Liqing smiled and went to greet him. The young man called Brother Shen cupped his hands and said, "I wonder why Brother Chen called me over? I do have something to trouble Brother Shen with." Chen Liqing smiled and said, "Let's go over and talk." Haha, we're all friends. There's no need to be so formal. The young man looked at Chen Liqing in surprise and said with a smile, but he kept an eye on Chen Liqing. He knew that even though he called these people brothers on the surface, they were all from wealthy families in the capital. He was just an outsider. With the difference in status, they wouldn't treat him as a friend. Moreover, the scholars of the capital in Qing and had always looked down on each other. If it weren't for the fact that he had no background in the capital and needed their help, and the fact that they needed his poetry, they wouldn't be so friendly on the surface. As he brought him over, Chen Liqing briefly explained what had happened. He smiled. We are scholars, so we're not like those boorish mountain people who rely on strength to win. It's a disgrace to our culture. But if it's a battle of words, we'll need Brother Shen's help. After all, in terms of poetry, Brother Shen is still better. This way we'll be absolutely safe. Brother Chen, you are being too modest. The Lantern Festival is just my luck. All of you here are famous scholars in the capital. How could I dare to show off in front of you all? The young man cupped his hands and said. The two complimented each other, and the crowd automatically opened up a path for them. Chen Liqing walked to the front and looked at Li Yi. For the sake of fairness, each side will send one scholar to fight, and one poem will decide the winner. He still wanted to save face in front of others. He couldn't let a group of famous scholars bully two nameless juniors. As long as Shen Zhao made a move, it would be enough to sweep them away. Even though Shen Zhao came from Qing, and it was said that when he was there, he was quite famous. In terms of poetry, there weren't many in the capital who could guarantee that they could beat him. With him here, they wouldn't lose today. Li Yi helped the naughty child dust off his body and turned around. Shen Zhao's heart sank when he saw that silhouette when he walked over from the other side. When that person turned around and saw his face, Shen Zhao's heart finally sank to the bottom of the valley. As the second scholar of Qing, and countless people followed him wherever he went. Countless young mistresses pursued him. And he could even make the prostitutes pay him money if he wanted to. Of course, this was all in the past. He didn't want to be the leader of the scholars of Qing and Prefecture. Why did he come to the capital? It was because he didn't have the face to stay in Qing and Prefecture. One poem, Immortal at the Magpie Bridge, and one poem, Shuidiao Getu, made him lose all of his pride there. It wasn't until he came to the capital and made a name for himself during the Lantern Festival that he regained some confidence. In terms of poetry, he wasn't afraid of Yang Yanzhou. He wasn't afraid of all the scholars of Qing and Prefecture. He wasn't even afraid of the famous scholars of the capital, except for one person. That person was standing right in front of him. Brother Shen, I'll have to trouble you with this poem. Chen Liqing walked over and patted his shoulder with a smile. After seeing Shen Zhao's poems, he had unparalleled confidence in Shen Zhao. He was also the one who was least likely to lose. If he could help him regain his face today, even if it was just a little bit of effort, it wouldn't matter if he managed to get on the Chen family's good side. Shen Zhao came back to his senses and finally realized what Chen Liqing wanted him to do. Brother Chen. Shen Zhao turned around and looked at Chen Liqing with an incomparably serious expression as he slowly spoke. I think you guys should fight. Chapter 314. Good. Seeing Shen Zhao open his mouth, Chen Liqing was just about to praise. Good poem. As soon as the word good left his mouth, he suddenly realized something was wrong. He stared at Shen Zhao and asked uncertainly, What did you just say? Shen Zhao sighed and looked at Chen Liqing. Brother Chen, believe me, if you choose to fight, your chances of winning will be higher. Brother Shen, now is not the time to joke. Chen Liqing raised his head and narrowed his eyes. Shen Zhao's behavior was very abnormal. Although Chen Liqing did not think much of him because of his family background, he had to admit that he was very talented in poetry. It was not difficult for him to write a poem out of his mouth. Under normal circumstances, Shen Zhao, who wanted to curry favor with the Chen family, would not offend him over such a small matter. In reality, he had not shown any intention of refusing, until just now. Chen Liqing's gaze immediately turned to the young man opposite him. What's going on? What's wrong with Shen Zhao? Confusion appeared on the faces of the people behind Chen Liqing. For a moment, they could not understand what he had just said. As for the people around them, their minds were even more muddled. Brotherly, long time no see. Shen Zhao raised his head and raised his hands in a salute to Li Yi. For some reason, after seeing this person who had changed the course of his fate again, his heart was calm and there was not a trace of hatred. In these days in the capital, he often thought back to the past. After losing the pride of the past, he suddenly found that the frivolity and arrogance of his youth, in the eyes of today, was just a joke. That young man had woken him up with a resounding slap, letting him know that there was always a higher mountain. He had completely shattered his pitiful arrogance, but it had also made him settle some things that he had never had before. Brother Shen, long time no see. To be able to see an old friend from Qing and prefecture here, Li Yi was slightly surprised and also raised his hands in a salute. Although the two of them had once clashed, there was no unforgettable hatred. To be able to see each other in the distant capital was not easy. Of course, the most important reason why Li Yi did not hate him was because he had taken advantage of him at that time. At this time, he faintly felt that the Shen Zhao in front of him was not the same as before. So they know each other. Everyone came to a sudden realization. No wonder Shen Zhao was unwilling to stand up for Chen Liqing. If that young master was an old acquaintance of his, then everything would make sense. Chen Liqing's face was a little embarrassed. He couldn't help but feel some resentment toward Shen Zhao. He sneered and said, "Shen Zhao, do you think that without you we can't compose a poem?" This time, she didn't even call him Brother Shen. Shen Zhao smiled and said, "I know that my talent in poetry is far from Brother Li's, so I won't embarrass myself. Brother Chen and the other brothers are all famous scholars in the capital, brimming with talent. Naturally, you don't need me." He naturally understood the meaning behind Chen Liqing's words. He was afraid that after today, they would no longer tolerate him. However, this was no longer important. These days he had been trying to cling on to others, and there seemed to be something stuck in his heart. When he said those words just now, he suddenly felt a long-lost carefree feeling. No matter how conceited Chen Liqing was, he wasn't conceited enough to think that his poetry was better than Shen Zhao's. He only thought that Shen Zhao's words were modest. However, even if he couldn't beat Shen Zhao, couldn't he be compared to a nameless kid? Have you all thought it through? If you really can't compose a poem, then admit defeat. Chen Liqing sneered and no longer cared about Shen Zhao. He looked at Li Yi and asked, "Why are you composing a poem? Go home and dream." Being forced to copy poems was something he had experienced many times. Li Yi had already lost interest in it. He waved his hand and said, "How old are you? What's the point of fighting all day? Can you not be so childish? Let's go." He patted the little fatty's head and turned to walk towards the exit. The little fatty hurriedly grabbed the little girl's hand and ran after him. "Big brother, wait for me." The one selling buns in front, "Wait a moment too." Chen Liqing stared blankly at their backs as they left. His face turned green and then white. There was a mouthful of hot blood in his chest. They left just like that. What was going on? Even if they wanted to leave, they had to apologize and break the legs of those servants before they could leave. "All of you, stop right there." Chen Liqing shouted loudly. Just as he was about to chase after them, the young man who left turned around and revealed 2 rows of white teeth. He smiled and said, "If you follow me again, I'll break your legs too." After saying that, Li Xian laughed loudly. He was in a good mood and quickened his pace to chase after them. The group of people who were left looked at each other in dismay. The surrounding people who wanted to watch the show were clearly disappointed. They thought that there would be an exciting battle of words and 2 excellent poems. They didn't expect that one side would retreat without a fight. But thinking about it, they knew that they were no match for Chen Liqing and the other scholars. If they really went to compose a poem, they would be asking for humiliation. They might as well retreat shamelessly. Preposterous. Chen Liqing's face no longer had the slightest trace of elegance. His eyes were about to spit fire. "Investigate. When we go down, we must investigate the background of those 2 fellows. He had suffered such humiliation. If he didn't avenge himself, he was afraid that his heart would never be at peace. Brother Liqing, why are you so angry? Left and right are just 2 cowardly rats. They don't even have the courage to fight a battle of words. I'm afraid that they don't have a bit of knowledge, and can't even compose a decent poem. Left and right are two idiots. After today, there will be no place for them in the circle of scholars in the capital. Absolutely, absolutely. Brother Lu's words make sense. A person beside Chun Liqing comforted him, and the rest of the people revealed looks of disdain on their faces at the right time as they echoed one after another. As for the surrounding people, even though they felt that it was unfair for Chun Liqing to propose a battle of words, the two young masters didn't even have the courage to accept the challenge. Even though they were smart, they didn't have the backbone of a scholar. Haha, they don't have a bit of knowledge, idiots. At this moment, an undisguised laughter rang out from the crowd. The laughter was piercing to the ears. Everyone turned their heads to look. It's Shen Zhao. After discovering the source of the laughter, everyone was stunned. What are you laughing at? Chun Liqing glared fiercely at him and asked. Shen Zhao held his stomach and laughed until he was out of breath. He pointed at Chun Liqing and said, Brother Chun, on your waist, can I take a look at the fan on your waist? Seeing Shen Zhao's expression, Chun Liqing was shocked. Why would he want a fan at this time? Was this Shen Zhao crazy? It was said that once this person became crazy, he could do anything. If one didn't do as he said, who knew what he would do? A trace of fear appeared on Chun Liqing's face. He quickly handed over the fan on his waist. Whoosh! Shen Zhao waved his hand and opened the fan. He smiled and said, You wrote this Shui Diao Getu on the fan. I believe that Brother Chun likes it a lot. Chun Liqing took a step back. He thought to himself that he liked this Shui Diao Getu. What did it have to do with Shen Zhao? Shen Zhao stopped laughing. He looked strangely at the scholar who had just called him an idiot. He said, When Brother Lu writes a poem that surpasses this Shui Diao Getu, then you can go say that others are an idiot. He returned the fan to Chun Liqing and laughed. Brother Chun, you don't need to investigate him anymore. That idiot brother is Qingan Prefecture Li Yi. Seeing the expressions of Chun Liqing and the other scholars change, Shen Zhao felt extremely carefree. He laughed a few times and turned to leave without looking back. Qingan Prefecture Li Yi. Even though they didn't know what he looked like, this name was not unfamiliar to the scholars and beauties of the capital. Her pretty face was full of shock. Her cherry lips parted slightly, and she took out the round fan from her bosom. There was the immortal magpie bridge that she had personally embroidered. In this world, the best way to become famous was to write an excellent poem. No matter where the poem first appeared, it would eventually be known by all the scholars of the Jing Kingdom and be passed down for generations to come. How can this be? How can this be? Chun Liqing's mind was blank as he mumbled to himself. The scholar surnamed Lu's face was red. He wanted to find a hole in the ground to hide in. The surrounding crowd was shocked. A few poems involuntarily appeared in their minds. Under the curtain, the rich young mistress's pretty face was slightly red. Her gaze occasionally looked in the direction of the exit of the plum blossom forest. At this moment, no one would think that the person who left was retreating without a fight. That was disdain, he was right. Chun Liqing was stupid and childish to compete with the scholars who wrote Shui Diao Getu and Immortal Magpie Bridge. Shen Zhao was not being modest just now. From the beginning to the end he had treated this matter as a joke. So what if it was Chun Liqing? So what if it was the gifted scholar of the Jing Kingdom? Could they make all the women in the world whisper in their boudoirs? If the feelings between the two were to last for a long time, why would they stay together day and night and embroider their poems on handkerchiefs? They couldn't. Thinking of this, everyone looked at Chun Liqing with a strange expression. Chapter 315. In a room in the back of the cold mountain temple. Ouch, be gentler, it hurts, it hurts. A servant of the Li family smeared the medicinal wine that the monks had brought onto the bruises on the chubby boy's face. The chubby boy, who had been hot-blooded and would rather be beaten than lower his head, continuously sucked in a breath of cold air and cried out in pain. It wasn't until a little girl stuffed a bun into his mouth that the room finally quieted down. Why have you come to the capital? Do you really have a younger brother here? Li Xian looked at Li Yi with a mind full of confusion, waiting for his explanation. Not only did he have a younger brother, but he also had 7 aunts and 8 aunts, even Wang Erniu from next door. To explain this matter to Li Xian, he first had to talk about the grudges of the previous generation. None of this is important. What's important is that I'm already in the capital, Li Yi said with a wave of his hand. He really didn't want to talk about those messy things again. He took a sip of tea and glanced at Li Xian. But didn't you come to the capital to finish your marriage? Why haven't you gone back yet? You're actually in the mood to discuss Zen with an old monk. This isn't like you. Could it be that after you got married, you've lost yourself in pleasure and even your personality has changed? If Li Yi remembered correctly, other than some special circumstances, a prince was not allowed to stay in the capital for long periods of time without the permission of the emperor. When he left Qing and Fu, Ningguang had already returned, but Li Xian was still here. It looked like he had no intention of leaving, Li Xian said gloomily. Uncle Huang said that sooner or later, I will have to manage father's fief. He wants me to stay in the capital and learn these things from the officials of the court. I'm afraid I won't be able to leave the capital in the short term. Li thought to himself that the emperor really was a busybody. He even had to worry about these things. Given the condition of his body, if he wanted to live to the end of his life, it would probably be up to luck. Thinking about it this way, it wasn't surprising to see him discussing Zen with the old monk here. With his temperament, he was absolutely suitable to be an idle prince, and he was even more suitable to be a scientist. Even if he was asked to govern a prefecture, a state, or even a county, it might be a good thing for the people, but he himself would definitely recite, "My white hair is 3,000 feet long, and my fate is like a long sorrow, and die of depression." Li Xian didn't continue to ask why Li Yi was in the capital. If he wanted to know, it wouldn't take much effort. However, as he said, none of this was important anymore. The important thing was that with him here, the future would not be so boring. Suddenly Li Yi thought of something important. He turned around, looked at Li Xian and said seriously, "By the way, don't tell Emingzu that I'm coming to the capital." "Why?" Li Xian looked at him with confusion. Emingzu was also very bored in the palace. In reality, he had planned to enter the palace today. If she knew that Li Yi had come to the capital, she would probably be very happy. The reason was, of course, if Her Highness knew that he was coming to the capital, she would certainly think of a way to make him stay. There was no doubt about this. Li Yi only treated this trip as a vacation. He didn't think he would stay here for the rest of his life. He had only left home for a few days, but he already missed Rui and Xiao Huan. Even when he saw a strong man on the street, Fang's face would involuntarily appear. This was an illness. He could only recover when he returned home. He sighed and said, "To be honest, I'm only staying in the capital for a few days. In a few days, I'll be returning to Qing and Fu." Although it was not very good not to greet her when he came to the capital, after thinking for a long time, Li felt that it was better for the two of them not to meet. The feeling of his life and death being controlled by others was something that Li Yi, who had a soul from the 21st century, was not something that he was used to. Unfortunately, in a feudal dynasty like the Jing kingdom, the royal family had this kind of power. If there was no need, he didn't want to have anything to do with the royal family. Li Xian was already an exception. If he got involved with the princess further, Li Yi was worried that the days where he could lie in the courtyard and bask in the sun would be gone forever. Of course, if she was still the cool and disrespectful Constable Emingzu, he would be very happy to accept it. So soon? Li Xian couldn't help but show disappointment on his face. He didn't have the excitement from before. After applying the medicine, the little fatty became excited again. It was the first time he showed off his power in front of his enemy. Even though he was slightly injured, he couldn't hide the excitement in his heart. He held the food in his hand and walked around the room. Suddenly, the little fatty looked at the surrounding walls of the room. His eyes rolled a few times, and he ran in front of Li Yi. He pointed at the strange marks on the wall and asked, "Big brother, what's written on the wall?" Although Li Yi didn't grow up in the capital, he was the number one among the younger generation in the Li family. It was normal for the little fatty to call him Big Brother. After what happened just now, the little fatty was full of good feelings towards this big brother that he had only met twice. Of course, he was more looking forward to having him teach him a few moves. When he fought with Chen Xiaotian, he would be able to send them flying with a kick. Just thinking about it made his blood boil. Hee, big brother doesn't study hard and can't read. The little girl skipped over and said with a smile. The little girl was also a member of the Li family. She was the daughter of a concubine of the Li family's third uncle. She was Li Yingxi's half-sister. Perhaps it was because she was too young, she was a little shy. She hid behind the little fatty and blinked her eyes curiously at Li Yi. Hearing this, the little fatty's face turned red. Although he didn't study hard, he could still recognize a few words. However, the words written on the wall were crooked and didn't look like they were written in a book. How could he recognize them? That's Sanskrit. It's normal that you don't recognize it, Li Yi said with a smile. You know Sanskrit? Li Xian looked at him in surprise. It was normal for the little fatty not to know Sanskrit. Li Yi grew up in Qing Prefecture. Under normal circumstances, he shouldn't be able to recognize it either. Once again, Li Yi confirmed that this guy must have dozed off in class when he was young. This was a temple. Buddhism originated from ancient India. Although the wheel of history had gone astray, it shouldn't be much different in this world. The earliest scriptures must have been written in Sanskrit. After being translated, it became what it was today. Li Yi had studied history carefully. In the early years of the previous dynasty, there was indeed a monk called Xuanzang who went west to India and brought back countless scriptures. However, it was different from the other world. After Xuanzang returned to his country, the Tang Empire was torn apart before he could translate the scriptures. Xuanzang also died of a serious illness. An eminent monk of that generation had fallen. Until now, those scriptures had not been completely translated. This was a temple. Other than Sanskrit, what else could those strange words written on the wall be? I know a thing or two, Li Yi said modestly without blushing. Of course, he didn't know Sanskrit. Although there were Buddhist classics and even Sanskrit dictionaries in the library, he always felt that it was useless to learn it. Moreover, one couldn't learn a language just by knowing a few words. There was no need to spend so much effort. What's written on the wall? Li Xian looked at him and asked in disbelief. Not only could he write poems and lyrics, he knew a lot of things that he didn't know. But he even knew such an obscure language like Sanskrit. The gap between them was so big that it hurt his heart 10,000 times more. When Bodhisattva Amitabha was deep in the Prajnaparamita, he saw that the 5 skandhas were empty, and he passed through all suffering. Form is not different from emptiness. Emptiness is not different from form. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Perception, thought, action, and knowledge are the same, Li Yi said casually. This is the Buddhist scripture, Mahaprajnaparamita Sutra. It talks about the path of Bodhisattva. Seeing that his big brother even knew these crooked things, the little fatty's eyes were already shining. Finally, Li Xian's face showed extreme surprise. Although he didn't know Sanskrit, Li Yi's words sounded very professional. Prajnaparamita, Sarira, form and emptiness sounded very professional. Coupled with his trust in him, he didn't doubt that what he said was a lie. Young benefactor is indeed knowledgeable. In the previous dynasty, Master Xuanzang translated the Prajnaparamita Sutra, but he only completed half of it before he reached nirvana. The other half of the sutra is still in our Cold Mountain Temple's sutra depository. I wonder where did young benefactor learn it? An old monk walked in from outside and asked with a smile. Master Tan Yin, could the Sanskrit on the wall really be that sutra? Li Xian walked over and asked the old monk skeptically. The old monk stroked his beard and smiled, shaking his head. That's the Diamond Sutra. Chapter 316. Li Yi was embarrassed. Thinking that Li Xian didn't know Sanskrit, he casually recited the Heart Sutra that Li Xian was most familiar with to fool him. The Heart Sutra was probably one of the most widely circulated scriptures in Buddhism in the future. Especially the lines form is not different from emptiness. Emptiness is not different from form. They often appeared in TV dramas. Even if you weren't a Buddhist, you could say it casually. It was awkward after saying it out loud. Being exposed by the old monk, and Li Xian's playful eyes, he was put on the spot for a moment. So I heard. At one time, the Buddha gave a lonely garden in the country of Shitra, together with 1,250 monks. Li Yi laughed dryly and said, "So it's the Diamond Sutra." "I'm sorry, I saw it wrong." Li Xian's face was full of disbelief. The two scriptures were so different. How could he have seen it wrong? Would a normal person think of the immortal Magpie Bridge as Shuidiao Getu? If he was literate, he wouldn't have made such a mistake. "So I heard. At one time the Buddha gave a lonely garden in the country of Shitra." The old monk raised his eyebrows and looked at Li Yi with a serious expression. Could it be the Diamond Sutra translated and annotated by the later Qin monk, Kumarajiva? Legend has it that this translation was recognized by the monks at that time, and was widely spread. However, it was lost with the fall of the later Qin dynasty. Where did you learn it? Obviously, what Li Yi just said was not what was written on the wall. The atmosphere in the room became awkward again. Li Yi decided not to speak anymore. This old monk must be taking revenge on him for tricking him earlier. It was said that a monk's 6 senses were pure, without anger, but it was all a lie. He had never seen a monk who held a grudge like this before. "Inkai, let's go home." Li Yi turned and said to the little fatty, then strode out of the room. "Young benefactor, please wait." The old monk stepped forward and blocked his way. With Li Yi's level, he didn't see how the monk came over. He just felt his vision blur, and a shiny bald head appeared in front of him. Li Yi was shocked, thinking that this old monk was not a Shaolin disciple. Could he be a spy of the Xiaorao sect? This wave-like subtle steps had already reached the acme of perfection. Expert. Li Yi was absolutely certain that this old monk was an expert. However, he wasn't worried, because under the guidance of a servant of the Li family, Mississippi Lu was already walking over. "Is there anything else, Grandmaster?" It was better to be polite in someone else's territory. Even if Mississippi Lu defeated the old monk, Rui wouldn't be able to deal with the 18 Arhats formation, Vajra demon subduing formation, and so on. A kind smile appeared on the old monk's face again as he asked, "I just want to know where you learned the Prajna Heart Sutra and Diamond Sutra that you mentioned just now." Li Yi's heart skipped a beat. He finally understood why the old monk would do such a thing. Although the overall history of this world hadn't changed much, there were still many historical differences from the original world. The eminent monk of the previous dynasty, Master Xuanzang, traveled thousands of miles from India to retrieve the Mahayana Buddhism, but he died before he could translate it into Chinese. Many Buddhist scriptures could only exist in the form of Sanskrit. With the rapid destruction of India, there were fewer and fewer people who knew Sanskrit. Eminent monks who were proficient in Sanskrit were even rarer. For decades, there hadn't been a mighty person who could translate these scriptures, which greatly hindered the spread of the teachings. The old monk's dharma must have reached a certain level. He could tell the difference just by listening to a few lines of the scriptures. He might have thought that the scriptures had already been translated by an eminent monk. "What's wrong?" Lu Rui walked over. After glancing at the old monk, he stood beside Li Yi and tilted his head to ask. The old monk still had a kind smile on his face, but his gaze lingered on Lu Rui for a moment longer. "I'm fine." Li Yi gave her a reassuring look. Since the old monk didn't have any ill intentions and didn't intend to use the 18 bronze men formation and the diamond demon subduing formation, there was no need to be cautious. He looked at the old monk and smiled. "It's a long story. It was a winter more than 10 years ago. I only remember that it was very cold that winter. The north wind was biting cold, and snow was flying everywhere. One morning, I opened the door to find an old monk in thin clothes lying in front of my house. Perhaps it was because of the climate change, but more than 10 years ago, the winter in Qing and Prefecture was much colder than it was now. Every year, there would be a heavy snowfall. The north wind was biting cold, and the snow would seal the mountains. Coincidentally, a famous doctor would fall in front of Li Yi's house this year. Next year, a Buddhist monk would fall, and the year after that an old Taoist would fall. In short, under the rule of Emperor Li Xian's relatives, the elderly in the Jing kingdom didn't have an easy time, especially during the difficult winter. Fortunately, the people of this era didn't lack warm-hearted people. Every time they found an elderly person lying in front of their house, they would kindly help them back. A bowl of hot soup and a quilt could save an elderly person who had one foot in the grave. Because he had the best audience in the world, with Li Yi's ability to tell stories, if he told stories in the brothel, the storytellers could only go hungry. Li Xian listened with great interest. He was very envious of Li Yi's luck of randomly picking up an eminent monk in front of his house. The gate of the prince's mansion was even more majestic and imposing. Why had no one ever fallen? It must be because those servants were too fierce. When he returned this time, he had to properly reorganize the servants in the mansion. So this scripture of yours is what you read from the old. The eminent monk left behind before he left. Li Xian suddenly understood and asked. The scripture written by the eminent monk is of extraordinary value. Where is that scripture now? Li touched his nose and said. Once when I was reading in the toilet, I found that the toilet token was gone. I saw that the paper of the scripture was soft, so Li Xian's eyes widened, his face full of disbelief. Looking at Master Tanyan's appearance, that scripture must be extraordinary. It was very likely that it was written by an eminent monk of the present age. It was incomparably precious and its value was immeasurable. Someone actually used such a treasure to wipe. The smile on the old monk's face had already stiffened. His beard could not help but tremble. A hint of redness appeared on his face, and his breathing also began to quicken. As if feeling danger, Li Yi raised his eyebrows and moved a little closer to Li Yi's side. Ba. After a moment, the old monk's breathing gradually calmed down. He chanted a Buddhist name and then asked, I wonder if the young benefactor remembers the contents of that scripture? Of course, I used that scripture to learn to read. I have long memorized all the scriptures in it. Li Yi used his own experience to verify that the saying that monks were tranquil and emotionless was a lie. This old monk was obviously a person of the eminent monk level. Just now, even his eyes were red. If he said that he did not remember the scripture in the scripture again, 18 monks with sticks all over their bodies would jump out at the next moment. That scripture is very important to my Buddhist sect. This old monk has a presumptuous request. Young benefactor, could you make a copy of those scriptures? In the future, my Buddhist sect will definitely repay you generously. It is also a virtuous deed, and will be blessed by Buddha. All the wrinkles on the old monk's face were revealed, and his turbid eyes were full of smiles. He looked even more like an enlightened eminent monk. It's nothing. Master, you are exaggerating. Li Yi smiled, equally extraordinary. With just a few words, the tense atmosphere from before finally disappeared, and became incomparably harmonious. Copying scriptures was not something that could be completed in a short time. It would take a few days. Of course, Li Yi would not stay in Cold Mountain Temple forever. He made an appointment with the old monk 7 days later. Cold Mountain Temple would send someone down the mountain to retrieve the scripture that Li Yi had copied. A servant from the Li family came to report that old mistress and the others had already left the mountain. The old monk personally sent them out of the temple, which immediately attracted countless people's amazement. They were wondering who those people were, and why Master Sandalwood would personally send them off. After all, the last time His Royal Highness Prince of Wei came, he did not receive such treatment. Along the way, Mississippi Lu's expression was not quite right. When she was about to get on the carriage, she looked back at the old monk. Master, do you know the 1,000-leaf palm of great compassion? The old monk was stunned, then shook his head. What about Arhut fist? The old monk shook his head again. Vajra palm. Ijinjing? He doesn't even know the 72 ultimate skills. What kind of master is he? Mississippi Lu curled her lips and mumbled before getting into the carriage. Chapter 317. It's the Cold Mountain Temple, a small temple. It's normal that they don't know the 72 ultimate arts. You can't expect any monk to be as powerful as the Dharma Hall of the Shaolin Temple. If there's a chance next time, I'll bring you to the Shaolin Temple. Inside the carriage, Li Yi was comforting Mississippi Lu, who didn't know the 72 ultimate arts of Shaolin. Looking at her disappointed expression, Li Yi suspected that accompanying the old madam was just an excuse, and that she wanted to see the legendary Shaolin Kung Fu. One had to know that in the Wuxia stories he had told her, every monk was an expert who looked down on the martial arts world. Fortunately, the old monk really didn't know those kung fu. Otherwise, if the two of them were to fight, the cold mountain temple would be torn down. Li Yi looked at her and advised, "Don't ask the master such questions in the future. A monk should keep a low profile. Even if he really knew these kung fu, he wouldn't say it out loud." Looking at Mississippi Lu nodding as if she understood his words, Li Yi felt relieved. It seemed that he had misunderstood her. Although Rui had a bad temper, she was not as stubborn as he thought. "Well, since he doesn't want to admit it, I'll just test him next time," Mississippi Lu said as she looked out of the window. Li Yi decided to take back his thoughts. Suddenly he seemed to realize something. He turned to look at her and asked, "You don't know?" "I really don't know the 1,000-leaf palm of mercy. And the Vajra palm, I've never heard of it. There are countless scriptures in the library. Which one is the muscle bone strengthening scripture?" In the cold mountain temple, the old monk looked at his disciples who had bruises all over their faces and asked, "What happened? Why are you all in such a sorry state? Was there a fight in the temple?" A young monk hugged his arms and shed 2 lines of aggrieved tears. He choked and said, "There was a female benefactor just now." Li Yi sighed and said, "Rui, it's better if you don't go to the cold mountain temple anymore. Their 18 bronze men formation and Vajra demon subduing formation are very powerful. Even a grandmaster wouldn't be able to escape easily once they're trapped. Especially the 18 bronze men. They hold iron rods in their hands and their bodies emit golden light." Mississippi Lu's eyes were full of fighting spirit. "Is that so? I'd like to see if it's really as powerful as you say it is." The carriage drove into the city gate. Mississippi Lu didn't plan to take the carriage back to the Li family. She planned to walk back slowly and experience the local customs in the capital. Li Yi did not intend to accompany her, but for the safety of the people in the capital, he got off the carriage. He dismissed the servants who wanted to stay, and let them go back with the little fatty. A beautiful young lady walked in front. When she passed by a stall or a shop, she would go in and take a look. 2 handsome young masters followed behind her. A little further away, a few guards lagged far behind. They were not as nervous as they used to be. With Mississippi Lu around, nothing would happen to His Royal Highness. If even she couldn't do it, it would be useless for them to go up. Mississippi Lu had just bought a piece of fashionable cloth. When she saw another shop with more luxurious decorations, she immediately handed the cloth to Li Yi and walked in. Li Xian's bodyguard tactfully walked over and took on the role of a porter. "Do you know, I found a kind of sturdy and light cloth in the capital. It's perfect for making kites. The capital is really not something Qing and prefecture can compare to. There are many good things here. I searched everywhere in Qing and prefecture, but I couldn't find a suitable cloth." As Li Xian walked, he said, "I've tried it before. The kites made from this kind of cloth can stay in the air for a longer period of time. Yesterday, a guard ran down a steep slope and actually flew more than 10 zhang in the air. However, he didn't fly too high. The highest he flew was about 2 zhang above the ground." Li Xian wasn't satisfied with growing wings on his mind. He wanted to plant wings on the guards of the prince's mansion. Fortunately, the guards of the prince's mansion were all experts. Even if they fell from a height of 3 to 2 feet, they would be fine. Otherwise, Prince Ning Mansion would definitely become the largest sanatorium for the disabled in the Jing Kingdom. According to his current knowledge, to be able to do this was already not bad. At the very least, he was in the right direction. He wasn't like that fellow who tied a rocket launcher to a chair and pulled 2 kites in his hands and wanted to fly into the sky. Also, I'm also making the hot air balloon that you mentioned last time. But there's a big problem. The cloth isn't fireproof and it's very likely to burn. There's also no suitable fuel. Even if I fly, I won't be able to last long." Under the inspiration of Li Yi, Li Xian's thinking had already far surpassed the people of this era. After such a long time, he finally understood that there was only one person in this world who could discuss these things with him. Geniuses were all lonely. Ordinary people couldn't understand the pain of not being able to find a confidant in the entire world. These words had been bottled up in his mind for a long time. Finally, he found someone who was worth talking to and who could understand him. From the beginning, his mouth hadn't closed. The direction is right. The material and fuel for the hot air balloon is indeed the biggest problem. There's something called tung oil. It's very light and heat resistant. I can try to apply it on the cloth. As for the fuel, there's also something called fierce kerosene. Maybe I can give it a try. Li Yi had discovered a long time ago that Mississippi Lu had no immunity to good-looking cloth. She obviously didn't know how to sew clothes, but every time she went out on the street, she would buy some cloth. Last time, 2 pieces of cloth were bitten by rats. In a fit of anger, she chased the rats out of their holes and tore them into pieces. Accompanying a woman shopping was a very tiring thing. Mississippi Lu entered the cloth shop and couldn't come out for a while. Li Yi casually sat down at a noodle stall next to the cloth shop and continued to complete his plan to cultivate a great scientist. Guest, would you like to eat noodles? A shy voice came from the opposite side. Li Yi raised his head and saw a skinny girl around 10 years old looking at them. The next moment, the little girl was pulled to the back by a woman with a white scarf wrapped around her head. The woman said with a smile, "Children don't know anything. Please rest as much as you want." The 2 young masters in front of them had extraordinary temperaments. The one on the left could probably buy the whole noodle stall with just 1 piece of clothing. How could such nobles eat noodles here? Li Yi saw the little girl hiding behind the woman and looking at them with a wronged expression. He smiled and said, "A bowl of noodles. Put more chopped green onions, no coriander." Having lived 2 lives, he didn't have the habit of not eating on the street. A few months ago, he and Xiaohuan ate a bowl of vegetarian noodles on the street of Qing'an Prefecture. It was better than any delicacy. Today he had eaten something in the morning. He was already hungry. Just thinking of the steaming hot sour noodle soup made his appetite increase. The woman was stunned for a moment, then immediately nodded and said, "Yes, please wait a moment. The noodles will be served soon." The skinny little girl washed a rough porcelain bowl 5 or 6 times before putting it on the table. The woman cooked a bowl of noodles. The noodles were 30% more than usual. She seasoned it, sprinkled a handful of chopped green onions, and immediately brought it over. "Guest, the noodles are ready." It was just a bowl of wheat flour in front of him. There wasn't even a single green vegetable, but it smelled extraordinarily fragrant. Li Yi looked at the woman in surprise. The sauce she had just put in was definitely not ordinary. Li Xian smelled the fragrance and couldn't help swallowing a mouthful of saliva. He hesitated for a moment, then raised his head and said, "Give me a bowl too." A guard came forward and was about to say something when Li Xian waved his hand. He had no choice but to leave. A moment later, at the noodle stall on the side of the street, 2 noblemen with extraordinary temperaments were eating noodles, which became a different kind of scenery on the street. Lu Rui walked out of the cloth shop with a roll of cloth in his arms and saw such a scene. Chapter 318. Lu Rui had used half a year to prove one thing. Anything that Li Yi liked to eat would definitely taste good. Therefore, after a while, there was another beautiful young lady sitting at the noodle stall eating noodles on the side of the street, in addition to the 2 noble young masters with extraordinary bearing. The lady stood in the stall, rubbing her hands nervously. The stall had always served uncouth people. Even if they were slightly noble, they wouldn't eat noodles here. She couldn't handle the scene in front of her. The skinny little girl had a faint smile on her face, revealing 2 cute canine teeth. If she wasn't too skinny and didn't have much flesh on her face, she would also be a beautiful little girl. "Madam, give me another bowl." Li Yi put down the bowl. He had even finished the soup, but he still felt like he hadn't had enough. Even he himself was curious why he had such a special liking for the noodles of this noodle stall. He felt a sense of familiarity, as if he had eaten it a long time ago, and more than once. It was rare for a distinguished guest to like to eat her family's noodles. The lady responded, and the smile on her face grew wider. She hurried to prepare the noodles. Li Xian cast a disdainful look at Li Yi's behavior. He had received the etiquette of the royal family since he was young. He only ate until he was 70% full. No matter how much he liked the food, he wouldn't eat a second bowl. He wiped his mouth, pushed the empty bowl to the side, and said, "Madam, cook another bowl. I want more noodles." Just now, he clearly saw that the noodles in Li Yi's bowl were at least 20% more than his. How could a dignified heir lose to him in this kind of thing? When he ate the second bowl of noodles, Li Yi slowed down. After all, although the bowl was a little small, the amount was not little. He looked up at the lady and asked, "The sauce that Madam just put in should be a secret recipe passed down in your family, right?" Li Yi had eaten a lot of noodles in his 2 lives, so he was quite knowledgeable about it. The noodles could only be considered average, but the soup was really delicious. It was not inferior to the famous old restaurants in his previous life. In the past, those elegant young masters would never look her in the eye when they passed by. The woman had never met such a kind noble before. She smiled and nodded, saying, "Noble's guess is correct. This sauce has been passed down from our ancestors for several decades. Looks like it's an old shop." Li Yi smiled and said, "The taste of this noodles is inexplicably familiar. I feel like I've eaten it somewhere before." "You're not from the capital, are you?" the woman asked. Li Yi shook his head and said, "Don't call me nobleman anymore. I'm really not from Beijing." Then, young master must have remembered wrongly. Our ancestors were all in the capital, and this secret recipe has never been shown to anyone. It's impossible for young master to have eaten it anywhere else. The nervousness in the woman's heart had almost disappeared. When talking about the secret recipe, she couldn't help but say a few more words. Li Yi didn't continue the question. Perhaps he really had eaten similar noodles before, but it was in another world. After all, there was already a bowl of noodles at the bottom. This time, he only ate half of the noodles and finished the soup. Li Xian rubbed his bulging stomach and imitated the woman to drink the soup. If this scene was seen by the imperial censor, he would at least reprimand him for losing his royal bearing. The woman began to clean the bowls and chopsticks while the little girl wiped the tables and chairs with a cloth. The weather was still cold after the lantern festival, but her forehead was covered in a fine layer of sweat. Bang! A muffled sound suddenly came from the side. A large foot immediately appeared on the table that the little girl had just wiped. What followed was a strong smell of foot odor. "Lady He, it's time to pay the membership fee." Li Yi covered his nose and looked at the rough man, as if he was looking at a gas bomb. Mississippi Lu had the fastest reaction. She had already pinched her nose and moved far away. The big man's foot was placed on the table next to Li Xian, less than a foot away. Li Yi clearly saw his face turn from red to white, and then green. Then he suddenly turned his head and covered his mouth to retch. Seeing him so disgusted that tears were about to flow down, Li Yi secretly sighed. He had eaten the noodles just now for nothing. When seeing the big man, the little girl's face turned pale, and she quickly ran behind the woman. The woman's face was pale. She looked at the big man and said in a trembling voice, "Master Hu, didn't we just pay this morning? Why, stop talking nonsense." The big man impatiently waved his hand and said, "This is my territory. I can collect whenever I want and however many times I want. If your noodle stall wants to continue operating here, then give me the money." Li Yi looked at this scene in surprise. The security in the capital of the country was actually so bad under the emperor's feet? How could the people collecting protection fees be so brazen? If this was in Qing'an Prefecture, which ruffian would dare to be so arrogant? They would have been beaten half to death by Lu Yi. Ever since he discovered the dark phenomenon of collecting protection fees in the city, under Li Yi's instigation, Lu Yi had thoroughly reorganized the ruffians and idlers in the city. He invited them to the county office for tea for a few days, and after that, there were no more cases of protection fees. Instead, a group of burly men could often be seen picking up trash on the streets. The hygiene of the city had immediately improved a lot. It was said that the magistrate had specially praised County Magistrate Lu for this and listed him as a role model for other counties to learn from. The woman said with a bitter face, "Master Hu, I really don't have any money. You took all the money this morning. We only did business with a few customers this morning." We really don't have any money. No money, let me see. The burly man called Tiger Lord kicked over the table in front of him and jumped inside. He picked up a worn-out wooden box on the ground. After opening it, he picked out a few copper coins from inside and casually threw the wooden box on the ground. He said, "Damn, it's my bad luck to have met a poor ghost like you." Lu Rui frowned. Just as she was about to walk over, she stopped in her tracks when she saw an officer patrolling the streets not far away. "What are you doing?" Seeing the patrol officer walking over from afar, the man waved his hand and said, "Brother Song, it's nothing. Do what you need to do. I'll treat you to a drink tonight. Don't go overboard." The patrol officer said, waved his hand and turned to leave. Li Yi was dumbfounded. Was this really the capital city? Could the collusion between officials and bandits be more obvious? No wonder the woman did not look happy when she saw the patrol officer walking over. Instead, she turned even paler. It turned out that the officials were in cahoots with the people collecting protection fees. The man took the copper coin, cursed inwardly, and was about to leave. However, someone would not let him leave so quickly. Li Xian's eyes seemed to be spewing fire. He kicked the man away. A long time ago, Li Yi knew that while he looked gentle and weak on the surface, he was actually quite skilled. At that time, when he had forcefully dragged him to Ningguang Fu, he had no power to resist at all. Who the F***ck? The man was quite powerful. He got up from the ground in a roll and cursed. Before he turned around, he was sent flying again. Li Xian pinched his nose. He did not want to go near that guy anymore. He waved his hand and retreated to Li Yi's side. Most of the time, Li Yi wondered if he had a split personality. When he was serious, he could be elegant and polite, making it impossible for anyone to find fault with him. But when he was hedonistic, he was the standard spoiled brat, swaggering through the streets with a bunch of lackeys. With just a wave of his hand, 2 guards would walk over and trample on the man like a human sandbag. Seeing the elegant young master suddenly become so fierce, the overlord of this generation, Master Hu, could only hug his head and beg for mercy. The woman's mouth was wide open, and she could not come back to her senses for a while. The little girl clutched the corner of her mother's clothes tightly. Tears were still hanging in the corner of her eyes. She stared blankly at the man rolling on the ground and clenched her fists. Chapter 319. Li Xian's face was extremely pale. He held onto the wall with one hand, and occasionally retched a few times. Li Yi believed that he wasn't being so cruel to that Tiger Lord, because he wanted to help the weak. When he ate until his stomach was round, the first thing he smelled was the pungent smell. It was already good enough that he didn't vomit out his gallbladder. That bastard, how many months had it been since he washed his feet? "Young master, you can't hit him, you can't hit him." The woman rushed out of the noodle shop with a panicked expression. Li Yi looked at the woman and asked with a frown, "How can there be such ruffians in the capital? Don't the officials care?" "You can't hit him. You really can't hit him." The woman was flustered and hurriedly said, "Young masters, you should leave this place quickly. When the officials come, you won't be able to leave. These ruffians were only robbing some copper coins. How could they compare to the officials? If they fell into the hands of the officials, they would lose their lives." The anger on Li Xian's face was difficult to quell. He coldly said, "I really don't plan on leaving today. I want to see what they can do to me." Because of the special status of the members of the royal family, their every action represented the face of the royal family. Thus, the royal family had very strict restrictions on them. They absolutely couldn't bully the commoners. Otherwise, the censor's impeachment would definitely fly to the emperor's desk like snowflakes. Of course, although they couldn't bully others, they couldn't be bullied by others either. Bullying the kind-hearted members of the royal family would at most be punished. Bullying the royal family wasn't a big crime. At most, they would be beheaded. Seeing that the young master in front of her was determined, the woman's expression became even more anxious. This noble was obviously of extraordinary birth, but how could he be compared to that huge monster? She couldn't drag him down. "You two stop." 2 loud shouts came from not far away. Several patrolling bailiffs quickly ran over. Without the crown prince's orders, the 2 guards wouldn't stop. The fact that the person who offended the crown prince could still scream in pain was simply a humiliation to them. With this thought in mind, the two of them exerted more strength in their hands and feet. Which thug dares to commit murder in the middle of the street? Stop right now, or don't blame us for being impolite. The leader of the group was the constable with the surname Song, whom they had just met. Before he even walked over, he had already heard the classic sayings of a constable. Clang. The 5 bailiffs drew their swords and surrounded the two of them. Stop. Li Xian walked over and said calmly. Only then did the 2 guards stop and turn around to look at the bailiffs who had surrounded them. Who are you? Constable Song asked. He knew that the person in front of him was the most important person in this group. Li Xian said coldly, "It doesn't matter who I am. What matters is that this bully is doing evil in the street. As an official, why don't you do anything and let him bully this mother and son?" When Constable Song heard this, he felt extremely depressed. This mother Kerr was just another busybody. If Wang Hu dared to do this to anyone else, he would have been arrested and sent to the government office to have his legs broken. However, the He mother and son were not on that list. The higher-ups had already instructed them to turn a blind eye to their affairs. All the ruffians on the street knew that they could come here to withdraw money when they needed it. As long as they didn't go overboard, the government wouldn't do anything to them. With which eye did you see them being bullied? Constable Song also snorted and said, I only saw the two of you committing murder in the middle of the street. It was a very bad influence. Come with us to the government office. At the side, Li finally noticed something different. This group of bailiffs and the group of bullies lying on the ground were obviously targeting the mother and son, and they must have some backing. In a place like the capital, there were countless pairs of eyes watching everything you did. If you saw a young master coming out of a brothel on the street, he would either be the only son of a prime minister or the heir of a duke's family. If Constable Song was so arrogant to everyone, he wouldn't have survived until now. However, this time, it was obvious that he had made a mistake. Constable Song didn't think that he had made a mistake. The waters of the capital were very deep. Unlike in other places, where even a small bailiff could do as he pleased in the countryside. In this place where nobility was everywhere and anyone he picked was a relative of the emperor, he naturally had to be careful. Otherwise, he might lose his head one day. Therefore, Constable Song was very clear about those people who couldn't be provoked. He even had a small booklet to record their names and pay attention to them on a daily basis. He also knew what they looked like. Of course, this person in front of him wasn't one of them. In fact, there were many people like this who were nosy before. However, when he realized that the county magistrate didn't even give face to a marquis, he knew what kind of backing they had. I'm the one who got you into trouble. The woman's face was pale. In the end, there was only bitterness left on her face. In fact, when Master Hu appeared at the noodle stall, many heads popped out from the shops on the street. They secretly cursed in their hearts. They didn't know who this lady from the He family had offended, but all the bullies on the street picked on her and bullied her. It wasn't easy for her to get to where she was after so many years. This time, she might not be able to keep the money she earned from selling the noodle. However, things didn't develop as they usually did. Wang Hu was kicked away by the thin and weak young master. He was punched and kicked like a dead dog. The young master was in big trouble now that the constables were here. In the past, there were also people who wanted to help the lady from the He family, but they all ended up in a miserable state. I really want to see which way the main gate of the capital county government opens. Li Xian stopped the guard from revealing his identity. He crossed his arms and said with interest, the constables didn't treat them as ordinary people. After all, they didn't take the county government seriously. They must be people of high status. They might not be able to offend the person who caused trouble for the He family, but they definitely could afford to offend Constable Song. As a result, a strange scene appeared on the street. A group of people walked in the direction of the county government. The two young masters in front were strolling leisurely, talking and laughing. The woman behind them was holding the little girl's hand. Her face was pale. A few constables followed behind as if they were escorting them. It was often said that it was difficult to be an official in the capital city. Those who were officials in the capital city were all outstanding among the country's officials. They were the true pillars of the country. It was not an exaggeration to say that they brought honor to their ancestors. Of course, this did not include the county magistrate of the capital city. Although the county magistrate of the capital city was the county magistrate in name, he was still under the rule of the emperor. His rank was very high, equivalent to or even slightly higher than the magistrate of the other provinces. However, no matter how high his rank was, it couldn't hide the awkward status of the county magistrate of the capital city. The reason was simple. The capital city was the capital of a country. It was where the imperial city was located. There were countless princes and nobles. From the beginning to the end of the street, there were several officials who had a higher rank than the county magistrate. Chen Yu was such a good-for-nothing county magistrate. He was just over 40 years old, and had a lot of white hair on his temples. It had been 3 years since he was promoted to the county magistrate of the capital city. At this time, Chen Yu was worried about a case. The young master of the Duke of Zhao Kingdom and the young master of the Duke of Wei fought over a girl in a brothel. The guards of the two families teamed up and tore down the brothel. Now he had to decide which of the two was guilty. How the hell was he supposed to decide? No matter which one it was, he couldn't afford to offend them. The only thing he could do was to smooth things over. As for the brothel, it was the bad luck of the madam. Just as he was feeling vexed, a constable came to report that there was a new case. Chapter 320. What case? Chen Yu asked impatiently. I think it's about the lady from the He family. I'm not sure about the details. Constable Song has brought her back and is waiting outside. All right. You can leave now. I'll be right there. Chen Yu waved his hand and said. The matter between the Duke of Zhao Kingdom and the Duke of Wei Kingdom had not been resolved yet. Now there was another trivial matter that needed to be dealt with. Chen Yu was filled with regret. If he knew that being a county magistrate in the capital city would be like this, he would not have used the power of his family to get this position 3 years ago. It would have been better to be a free magistrate in another state. There was no trifling matter at the foot of the emperor. Any ordinary case in the capital city could reach the ears of the emperor. If it was not handled well, the magistrate might be sent back to his hometown. It's that lady with the surname He again. Chen Yu frowned. He stood up and walked out. Although he was the county magistrate of the capital city, he was also a branch of the Chen family. If it was not for the support of the House of Duke, he would not be where he was today. Of course, he had to pay attention to the things that they asked him to do. Chen Yu had heard about what happened 20 years ago. There was a noble family that had a marriage alliance with the House of Duke. Before the wedding, the eldest son of the family eloped with a commoner girl. This caused the House of Duke to lose face, and became the laughingstock of the wealthy families in the capital city. The lady from the Chen family never married. Until now, she was still living in the House of Duke. Now that the High Duke's public house was like the sun in the sky, the other noble family that was once prominent was gradually declining, and the woman's family was also affected. Due to certain reasons, the High Duke's public house could not be too ruthless, but they would not let them off easily either. Chen Yu was ordered by the House of Duke to take care of the He family for the past 3 years. The hall of the county government was actually a very dignified place. There was a huge horizontal board hanging in the center of the hall with the words, Mirror of Eminence hangs high. 2 rows of bailiffs stood solemnly on both sides of the hall with water and fire sticks in their hands. As soon as the county magistrate hit the gavel, they would keep hitting the ground with the sticks and say mighty, to directly attack the psychological defense of the criminal. Li Yi was already used to all of this, so he wasn't affected in the slightest. Needless to say, Li Xian, even the second young miss of the Lu family, was sizing up the decorations here as she commented on them. The capital was indeed the capital. The main hall of the county yamen exuded an atmosphere of grandeur, much grander than the Anxi county yamen. As for the woman and the little girl, they weren't so calm. The woman's face was pale, but she could barely maintain her composure. The little girl tugged at the corner of her mother's clothes. and her big bright eyes were filled with panic. "Little sister, what's your name?" Li Yi walked to her side, squatted down, and said with a smile, "These bastards, if such a little girl is scared, it will probably leave a psychological shadow for the rest of her life." The little girl bit her lips. After a long time she said softly, "Duanwu. Duanwu. What a nice name. You treated me to noodles just now. Now I'll treat you to something, okay?" Li Yi said, looking at her. The little girl shook her head, looked at him, and said timidly, "To eat noodles you have to pay for it." "Duanwu, what are you talking about?" The woman pulled her behind her and hurriedly said to Li Yi, "Young master, don't listen to her." Hearing this, Li Yi was stunned, and then he laughed. He turned to look at Li Xian and asked, "Do you have money with you? You forgot to pay for the noodles just now." Of course, Li Xian wouldn't bring money with him. A guard who was perceptive handed him an ingot in time. Mother change. As if influenced by Li Yi, the little girl wasn't as scared as before. She took the ingot and handed it to her mother. She had only seen broken silver before, and she knew that whenever a customer paid with such things, her mother would always get back a lot of copper coins. "You're so rude, return the money." When the woman scolded the little girl with a straight face, Li Yi waved his hand and took out a paper bag from his chest. After opening it, he placed it in front of the little girl and said, "Can I treat you to something now?" Inside the paper bag was the candied plums that the little fatty had given him. In exchange, Li Yi had to hide the fact that he was fighting outside. As for the bruises on his face, the official explanation was that he fell down. Of course, this fall had to be very skillful. Ordinary people wouldn't be able to fall like this without 8 to 10 years of martial arts. The little fatty might be gifted. It just depended on whether his parents believed it or not. It had to be said that the little fatty was quite accomplished in the art of eating. The candied plums that he gave to Li Yi were the best of the best. Smelling the fragrance of the candied plums, the little girl swallowed a mouthful of saliva, but she didn't immediately reach out her hand. She looked up at him, and a trace of desire flashed in her eyes. She asked, "Do I need money?" "This is Big Brother's treat. It's free," Li Yi said with a smile. "Thank you, Big Brother." The little girl finally reached out her hand and only took one piece. She split it in half and handed the extra half to the woman. She turned back to look at Li Yi and said, "Next time I'll treat Big Brother to noodles. It's free." The surrounding bailiffs were all dumbfounded. They had never seen such an arrogant person in court. Not to mention that he was chatting and laughing, he was even eating now. Did he even put them in his eyes? But what was the little girl eating? It smelled so good, and they really wanted to try it. They secretly swallowed a mouthful of saliva, but none of the bailiffs dared to do so. Those who dared to be so presumptuous in court were either crazy or really had something to rely on. It was obviously not the former who could bring guards with him. They just needed to pretend that they didn't see it. It was better to leave the trouble to the county magistrate. Li Xian was surprised to see this. Finally, he couldn't help but pull Li Yi aside and asked, "Did you know this little girl before?" "It's my first time seeing her." Li Yi shook his head. Li Xian looked even more puzzled. It was the first time he saw Li Yi being so friendly to a stranger. He asked suspiciously, "Don't tell me that you have feelings for this little girl." "Get lost." Li Yi spat out a word unceremoniously. This guy's mind was too dirty. She was just a child. His good impression of this little girl came entirely from an inexplicable sense of intimacy. Perhaps seeing her appearance had triggered some memories. After all, when he was young, he had also suffered a lot. For the time being, he would just take it that she was more to his liking. Li Xian looked at the little girl curiously again. He took out a piece of candied fruit from the paper bag in Li Yi's hand. Just as he threw it into his mouth, an angry rebuke came from the front. "How dare you? The court is not a restaurant. Who are you? How dare you be presumptuous in court?" Seeing the middle-aged man in official robes walk out from the back of the hall, Li Xian slowly swallowed the candied fruit and wiped his mouth. Only then did he raise his head to look at the man and say, "Today, I saw an evil tyrant bullying the good on the street. Yet the officials didn't care and even helped the tyrant commit his crimes. I read the books of the sages. Although I'm a commoner, I still have a sense of righteousness. I would like to ask Lord Magistrate, in the capital city, under the feet of the Son of Heaven, is there still law? Books of sages? Commoners? Li Yi was stunned. He looked at Li Xian and then at the middle-aged official in the court. He was speechless for a moment. Did the sages teach you to be presumptuous in court? Chen Yu's eyes flashed. He slammed the gavel and said loudly. Chapter 321. Chen Yu was the magistrate of the capital city, so he naturally knew who he couldn't provoke. He also knew those nobles, especially those who didn't have to give face to Duke Chen's mansion. They claimed to be commoners and looked unfamiliar, but they claimed to be scholars. Their faces were full of righteousness, as if they were seeking justice for the people. Chen Yu had been an official for many years and had seen too many scholars like this. The current emperor attached great importance to the imperial examinations and recruited scholars from all over the world. It could be said that he had paved a broad road for scholars in the Jing kingdom. Countless scholars from poor families, after 10 years of hard work, were entrusted with important tasks once they passed the examinations. In their lifetime, there were countless who became part of the imperial court. These young people who read the books of sages boasted that they were righteous and fearless. Of course, they were also a group of people who liked to meddle in other people's business. Disrespecting the court should have been punished with flogging as a warning to others. Seeing that you are scholars, I will forgive you this once. Chen Yu sat on the main seat and said calmly, scholars liked to meddle in other people's business, and were the most difficult to deal with. One or two of them wouldn't be a problem, but if they gathered together and blocked the county yamen, regardless of whether they had a reason or not, it would be enough to make him, the magistrate of the capital city, suffer. Hearing the words of the official in the court, the woman immediately pulled the little girl to kneel. Scholars didn't have to kneel in the court, but if they didn't understand etiquette, they would be punished. Constable Song, what happened? Tell me in detail. Chen Yu said again. Chen Yu spoke up once more. No matter how biased he was in secret, he still had to act like he was going by the book. My lord, this subordinate was patrolling the streets as usual. When we discovered that there were people fighting on the side of the street, we immediately went forward to stop them. Who would have thought that the culprit would not listen to our advice and had no regard for the law? Constable Song had a righteous expression and a dutiful expression on his face. He pointed at Li Xian's 2 bodyguards and then pointed at the battered man that was carried back by the 2 bailiffs. He said, these are the 2 thugs and the victim. Nonsense. It's obvious that this evil man robbed the mother and daughter of their money. As officials, you didn't do anything about it. It's obvious that you're colluding with him. You're in cahoots with him. Li Xian looked up at the man in the hall and asked, are all the people in the county government this kind of people who don't care about the lives of the people? Seeing Li Xian's righteousness, as if he really was a scholar who was pleading for the people, Li felt that if there was a Best Actor award in this world, there would definitely be a spot for him. He didn't use his identity as a prince, but pretended that he didn't have any background. There must be something wrong with this abnormal situation. No matter how he looked at it, the forehead of the official in the court was faintly black, and he would be in trouble soon. How dare you? Chen Yu slammed the gavel and said angrily. He stared at the woman in the audience with bright eyes and asked, Madam, tell me, did someone want to rob you and your daughter of their money? The woman turned her head and looked at Li Xian with deep regret in her eyes. She gritted her teeth and said, no. She knew that if she told the truth, it would end up harming the 2 young masters. Wasn't twisting the truth the best thing these officials did? Chen Yu walked to the audience and looked at Li Xian. He said, even she denied it. What else do you have to say? Li Xian looked at the woman with a thoughtful expression. Men, arrest these 2 lawless villains who are fighting in the street, and give them 50 strokes of the cane. Chen Yu waved his hand and looked at Li Xian. He said again, keep your servants in check in the future. If it happens again, I won't let it go easily. You dog official, you're really in cahoots with these guys. Rui said coldly. If Li Yi hadn't stopped him, he would have pulled out his sword and cut off the dog official's head. Li Yi looked bitter. He decided not to tell Mississippi Lu those martial arts stories anymore. She didn't learn the good ones, but always learned those messy things. Killing dog officials and eliminating evil officials were the work of the Condor hero. What did it have to do with her, the deadly fairy? Chunyu's face was a little pale. He had been an official for many years and had never been called a dog official. Before he could lose his temper, a jade waist token appeared in front of him. The supervisory censor of Gyeonggi province. Chunyu was shocked. He looked at the jade token carefully and his face suddenly changed. The supervision system of the Jing kingdom was mostly inherited from the previous dynasty. The supervisory censor was in charge of supervising the officials, patrolling the counties, and correcting the prisons. Although they were not high-ranking officials, they had a wide range of authority. Princesses, princes, nobles, and officials were all afraid of these censors. Even if Lord Chen did something wrong, these censors could still not give him face, let alone a small capital magistrate. However, when did the supervisory censor of Gyeonggi province change, and he was such a young man? The token that represented his identity could not be fake. Chunyu's face changed and he said with a smile, "I didn't know you were coming, supervisor. I didn't go out to greet you. Say no more." Li Xian waved his hand impatiently and said, "I'll report what I've seen and heard today to His Majesty. Take care, Your Excellency." The supervisory censor had the right to meet the emperor directly. Chunyu felt his vision go black, and his body swayed a few times. Immediately, a runner came over and supported him in time. Since he was the supervisor, why didn't he say so earlier? He had obviously dug a big hole for him to jump into. If Chunyu knew what the entrapment law enforcement was, he would not have been so careless. Unfortunately, it was all too late now. Seeing that the few people had left the hall, Chunyu forced himself to stand up straight and said hurriedly, "Prepare the carriage. We're going to Lord Chen's mansion." "How did you become the supervisor?" Li Yi asked Li Xian in surprise outside the county government. "It's just a convenient identity. The capital is not like Qing'an Mansion. With this token, it will be much easier to get things done," Li Xian said. Li Yi looked at him enviously. He had to admit that His Majesty treated him very well. The emperor had even thought of this. Although the supervisory censor was a low-ranking official, he was in charge of a lot of things. He could even manage the affairs of the royal family. The emperor treated him like his own son. No, even the emperor's own son did not have such preferential treatment. "Don't worry. Since I've come across this matter, I will definitely get to the bottom of it." Li Xian turned around and said to the mother and daughter, Thank you, Your Excellency." The situation had turned around so quickly that the woman had not yet recovered from the shock. Hearing Li Xian's words, she hurriedly bowed and said, although she did not know who this excellency was, a glimmer of hope was ignited in her heart when he saw that even the county magistrate did not give face to him. Now that things had developed to this point, it was clear that the mother and daughter were no longer involved. Perhaps it was because he had been disgusted earlier, but Li Xian was obviously very serious about this matter. It was better for the county magistrate to clean up his mess. Otherwise, he would not be able to escape this time. Li Yi had rejected the invitation to visit his late son's mansion. There was still a matter at home that had not been taken care of. The chubby boy thought that his plan was flawless and wanted to use the excuse of falling to get away. At this time, no one knew what kind of torture he was suffering. Li Yi also had a part in this matter, so it was only right for him to share some of the burden. As expected, not long after he stepped into the Li mansion, the chubby boy's howl came from one of the halls. Chapter 322. I really fell down on the mountain. Big brother can be my witness. If you don't believe me, you can ask Big Brother. The little fatty defended himself loudly. In his opinion, a bag of 10 li xiang, candied plums, was enough to bribe anyone. I heard that you were beaten up by the young master of the Chen family until you were begging for mercy? A beautiful woman suddenly looked at him and asked. Nonsense. I was the one who beat them up. Hearing what his aunt said, the little fatty's face turned red as if he had been insulted. What, you beat up the young master of Duke Chen's family? Another woman's expression changed as she exclaimed. There were quite a few people in the hall. Other than the old madam, Li Mingze and his wife, Li Mingyuan and his wife were all present. The little fatty's mother was rubbing medicine for him with a heartache. The one who exclaimed just now was Li Mingze's wife, Madame Fong. This child, how can you be so good at causing trouble? Is the Chen family something we can provoke? Madame Fong said angrily. The Chen family and the Li family were not on good terms. The Chen family was powerful and the Li family had always avoided conflict with them. The young master of the Chen family was very favored by the Chen family. If they were to provoke the Chen family because of this, it was hard to say what they would do to the Li family. Sister-in-law, what are you saying? Although Inkai is a bit greedy, he would never take the initiative to bully others. However, the Chen family has always been targeting our Li family. Are they the only ones allowed to bully us while our child can't even fight back? Although Li Mingyuan's wife, Madame Lu, usually kept a low profile like her husband, she naturally wouldn't remain silent when it came to her child. Madame Fong said unhappily, Look, now you're blaming me. The Chen family and the Li family have been friends for generations. Why did it become like this today? Isn't it because... Stop! Li Mingze was the master of the Li family. After he spoke, no one else spoke. Li Wen, how did Inkai and the young master of Duke Chen's family get into conflict? Tell me honestly. Li Mingze pointed at a servant behind the little fatty. The servant glanced at the little fatty and gave him an apologetic look. He didn't dare to disobey the family head's orders, so he could only tell the whole story in full detail. After listening to the cause of the matter, Li Mingze said, Although genius was in the right in this matter, he still fought with someone. Prepare a generous gift and send it to the Chen family. As the head of the family, of course, he couldn't let his emotions affect his decisions. The Chen family was like the sun in the sky, still as glorious as ever. The Li family was supported by him alone. If he could avoid offending the Chen family, it would be better not to offend them. There's no need. Although the Li family has declined, we are not a family that can be easily bullied by others. Our Li family has let them down for what happened back then. However, we have already repaid what should be repaid after all these years. The only person we owe is that child from the Chen family. At this time, the old woman who had been silent all this while stood up and said, This matter was the Chen family who broke the rules first. Inkai didn't do anything wrong, neither did Ear. This is a matter between children. If the Chen family still cares about their reputation, they won't pursue it. As for Ear's friend, it's his first time in the capital. Why would he have a friend here? I met him in Qing Prefecture. It was a coincidence that I bumped into him in the capital this time. Li walked in from outside and explained. Ear and Rui are back. The old mistress smiled and said, If it wasn't for Ear today, Inkai would have been at a disadvantage. We are all family, so we should help each other. The old mistress had lived for a lifetime. From the glory days of the Li family until now, she had seen too many things. She knew the root of a family's longevity. She was actually very satisfied with Li Yi's actions today. Yes. Big Brother's kung fu is amazing. You must teach me. The next time I see Chen Xiaotian, I can send him flying with one kick. Seeing Li Yi, the chubby boy was obviously in high spirits. He ran over excitedly and said, the scene he saw on the mountain was still deeply engraved in his mind. Hiss! Before he could finish, he sucked in a breath of cold air in pain. Lady Yin pulled his ear and dragged him back. Lady Fong laughed coldly and said in a strange tone, Haha, Inkai didn't lose out, but we have offended the Chen family again. That year, Big Brother abandoned the third daughter of the Chen family and ran away, causing the two families to become enemies. Now, Big Brother's family and the Chen family probably have a feud for generations. Knowing that she had always held a grudge against Big Brother's family, Li Mingze frowned slightly. In front of so many people, he couldn't reprimand her. He turned to look at Li Yi and said, In a few days, I will think of a way to move around and see if I can transfer you to the capital. However, the capital is not like Qing Prefecture. In the future, remember not to be so impulsive. Li Yi could feel that although this second aunt seemed to be dissatisfied with him, he really didn't take it to heart. After all, it wasn't like he hadn't seen second aunt before. He had long been immune to her. However, they had only known each other for a day, But this dignified man in front of him was so protective of him. He really was like an elder in the family, which made him feel slightly touched. As for the transfer, Li Yi didn't say much. Although he was only a small county lieutenant, no one could transfer this position unless the emperor said so. Li Yi felt that it was good to be an idle county lieutenant in Qing Prefecture. He could train a few capable subordinates and live a perfect life with only a salary and no work. Wasn't it much easier than working hard in the capital? It would be best if His Majesty had long forgotten about him. This ideal would become reality. Thinking about it, the emperor was very busy. He had to deal with thousands of affairs in the day and thousands of concubines at night. Anyway, he was very busy during the day and night. He was just a small character, so he probably wouldn't care about him. Oh right, it's best to let your friend in the capital leave the capital as soon as possible. If he is found by Duke Chen, I'm afraid it will be very troublesome. Li Mingzi reminded again. In his view, Li Yi's friend naturally wouldn't be someone powerful. He was far from being able to compete with Duke Chen. Li Yi nodded, but he didn't take this matter to heart. Whether Li Xian left the capital was naturally not something he could control. It would be fine if they didn't investigate. If Duke Chen found out about him, who knew who would be in trouble? Investigate, we must find out who they are. In Duke Chen's mansion, a few guards with broken legs were lying in rows outside, wailing in pain. A beautiful woman pointed at the few people in the room and said loudly. She looked at the young boy in her arms with a swollen face and tears in his eyes. She gritted her teeth and said, "The Li family, it's the Li family again. 20 years ago, they made our Chen family lose face. Today they treat my son like this. I will not let you go. Where is Chen Yu? Let him handle this matter. He will go to the Li family to seek justice for my son." Beside her, a middle-aged man looked at the guards wailing outside the door. His face was also gloomy. "Li Qing, other than the Li family, have you found out the identities of the others?" The middle-aged man looked at Chen Liqing, who was standing there with his head lowered, and asked calmly. Hearing this, Chen Liqing trembled and immediately said, "I only know that there is a person named Li Yi, from Qing province. I don't know what relationship he has with the Li family. As for the person who ordered the guards to break one of their legs, I haven't found him yet." The middle-aged man's frown deepened. At this moment, someone walked in quickly and whispered a few words in Chen Liqing's ear. Hearing this, Chen Liqing immediately walked in front of the middle-aged man and said again, "I found out. The young man named Li Yi is the eldest grandson of the Li family who just returned. He is the son of the eldest son Li Minghan, who left the Li family 20 years ago. A few days ago, the Li family had been sending people to search for him. He only arrived in the capital yesterday." Just as Chen Liqing finished speaking, a strange sound came from behind the screen in the hall. The face of the woman behind the screen was pale. She clenched her fists so tightly that her nails dug into her palms. Blood dripped down her palms, but she didn't notice. Chapter 323. What? You're saying Li Minghan is back? Hearing Chen Liqing's words, the middle-aged man's eyes flashed and his expression darkened. "Yes, I heard this from a servant of the Li family. It shouldn't be wrong," Chen Liqing said apprehensively as he looked up at the middle-aged man. Seeing the expression on his uncle's face, he knew that the rumors about the grudge between the Chen and Li family 20 years ago were probably true. The gorgeous woman raised her head and said fiercely, "Li Minghan and that bitch still dare to come back. Not just us, but the Li family probably can't tolerate them anymore. Will Li Mingzi return the position of family head to him? Even if he's willing, the Li family won't be willing, right? Li Minghan left all those years ago and delayed my little sister for 20 years. Now that he's back, let's settle old and new debts together," the middle-aged man said gloomily. When he said that name, there was an unconcealable disgust on his face. "Don't tell my little sister about this for now. Let Chen Yu go directly to the Li family to arrest them. There's evidence, and no one else can say anything." When the middle-aged man looked at the guard with a broken leg, his eyes suddenly flashed with a cold light. If one of these people had died from their injuries, things would have been much easier to deal with. Although the Li family had declined, they were once a prominent family that couldn't be underestimated. Even if the Chen family wanted to target them, they couldn't do so unscrupulously and would meet with great resistance. If not for this, the Li family would have been pushed out of the capital long ago. Chen Yu can't even protect himself now. A cold snort sounded from the door. Another middle-aged man with a dignified expression walked in. Behind him was the pale-faced Chen Yu. Chen Guogong was already old, and he was more of a deterrent in the Chen family. The person in charge of the daily affairs of the Chen family was the current Chen Guogong's eldest son, Chen Qing. How is this possible? Chen Yu is doing a good job as the Chen family's magistrate. Why would Big Brother say this? Could it be that someone is targeting the Chen family? Chen Chong said in shock. Losing a capital order was nothing to the Chen family, but knowing that Chen Yu was a member of the Chen family, they still wanted to make a move on him. The meaning behind this was not ordinary. I heard that little Tian and the rest had a conflict with someone outside? Chen Qing didn't answer but asked a question instead. Big Brother, you have to seek justice for little Tian. The beautiful woman wiped her tears and said, look at how little Tian and the others were beaten by the Li family. Also, my Chen family's guards all had one of their legs broken. This is not beating them, but slapping our Chen family's face. I'm afraid it's not just the Li family, right? Chen Qing asked again. The woman said with a face full of resentment, yes, if they didn't have an accomplice, we wouldn't have suffered such a big loss. That person didn't put our Chen Guogong public house in his eyes at all. I've already sent people to investigate. I won't let him go so easily. Chen Qing sneered and said, of course they wouldn't put our Chen family in their eyes. His Majesty's body is unwell, and the princes and princesses are all praying for His Majesty. Ningguang Shizi and Shizi Fei are also in Jing City. Today they went to Cold Mountain Temple and were offended by this group of blind dogs. Tell me, who would you not easily let off? What they are? How is this possible? The beautiful woman's face suddenly turned pale when she heard this. She said in disbelief, could it be that those servants whose legs were broken had offended Prince Ning and his wife today? Chen Qing glanced at them and said, I've told you long ago that we will get back at the Li family for my little sister's grievances. There's no need to cause trouble for the He family. Yet for this small matter, you've dragged Qin Yu into it as well, bending the law for personal gain to the supervisor of Jiangxi province. I'm afraid Qin Yu's position in the capital has come to an end. Everything that the Chen family has done for him over the past few years has gone down the drain. A bitter smile appeared on Qin Yu's face. With the current situation, he couldn't intervene. Qin Yu has been in office for 3 years and hasn't made any major mistakes. He won't lose his position because of this matter, right? Qin Chong hesitated and said, moreover, the Chen family has influence in the imperial censor. Why don't we send someone to the supervisor of the imperial censors? We should. Chen Qing looked at him and asked, His Majesty just appointed Prince Ning as the supervisor of Jiangxi province 2 days ago. This morning, he was offended by that group of servants. Just now you were still thinking about how to not let him go. How do you think we should do that? This. Chen Chong was stumped for words. Although the Chen family was one of the top nobles in the capital, all of this was given by the imperial family. If they were to clash with the imperial family, they wouldn't end up well. If it was an ordinary clash, it wouldn't be a big deal. After all, this wasn't Prince Ning's territory. In terms of strength, the Chen family was stronger. However, the crown prince and his wife were praying for His Majesty. If this matter was blown out of proportion, it wouldn't just be a conflict with the crown prince. Let's drop this matter for now. Send someone to prepare a generous gift and personally deliver it to the crown prince's residence. Tell them that it was the evil servants of the family who offended His Highness. Apologize to them carefully. As for Chen Yu's matter, don't mention it again. The only thing the Chen family could do now was to lower their stance as much as possible. As for Chen Yu's fate, it would depend on how the crown prince wanted to deal with it. As for the Li family, they didn't know what kind of relationship they had with the crown prince's residence. The power structure in the capital was very complicated. If a single move was made, it would affect everything. Chen Qing said a few words in a low voice and said, "For the time being, keep the matter of Li Mingan's return to the capital a secret from third sister. Tell them to watch their mouths. If even the slightest bit of information is leaked, they will not be let off lightly." When Chen Qing said this sentence, a figure had already retreated from behind the screen. When she passed through the courtyard of the back hall, there were already 2 streaks of tears on the woman's face. She was still mumbling to herself, "He's back, he's finally back." The old mistress went to the Cold Mountain Temple today to pay a visit to an eminent monk with profound dharma. However, it seemed that she didn't see the Ruidu. She didn't see the master and returned in disappointment. She didn't expect the old monk to be a famous person. Li Yi didn't know whether or not his dharma was profound, but he liked to give empty promises. He promised to copy the scriptures, but all he got was a promise of, "I will repay you generously in the future." It was too insincere. Li Yi felt it was a pity that the old monk wasn't in Qing and prefecture. Otherwise he could have given him a chance to repay him generously. The Ruidu that Master Tanin had consecrated, why couldn't he sell it for 10 times the price? Now he could only wait until the branch of Rui workshop opened in the capital, and then invite him to cut the ribbon to repay the favor. He had even thought of the advertising slogan, "Ruidu, Master Tanin said it was good after using it." If he painted a charmingly naive bald head on the bottle, it would definitely sell well. Chapter 324. The skinny little girl sat on a big rock at the entrance of the alley, looking at the pedestrians coming and going on the street. She took out a small cloth bag from her bosom, opened it layer by layer, and a faint sweet smell filled the air. It was a small piece of candied plum. The girl carefully tore a small piece from the edge, wrapped the rest, and hid it in her bosom. She placed a small piece of candied plum in her mouth, and was reluctant to swallow it. Only when the taste that was sweeter than honey was completely gone did she carefully chew it. She took out the small cloth bag again and repeated the action just now. She had been eating the half piece of candied plum that her mother gave her in the end like this for a whole day. In his memory, this kind of fragrance could only be smelled at the entrance of a shop called 10 Miles Fragrance. Furthermore, he couldn't be discovered by the shop's employees. They would chase him away while scolding him as little beggar. She was not a beggar. Although she didn't have beautiful new clothes to wear, she always washed her clothes clean, cleaner than all the children she had seen. Customers didn't like a dirty girl in a noodle shop. She didn't like the staff of Ten Li Xiang. They always called her little beggar. She liked the brother she saw yesterday, because he treated her to delicious food. The next time she saw him, she must treat him to noodles free of charge. Her grandmother was sick, and her mother didn't go out today, so she definitely wouldn't see that brother today. The little girl was a little disappointed. No one had ever praised her name. Except for her mother and uncle, everyone looked at her strangely. Even her father was no exception. Since the day her father sent her and her mother back to her grandmother's house, she hadn't seen him again. "He Duanwu, little beggar, mother gave birth, no father to teach me." A group of children ran over from a distance, pointing at the girl sitting on the rock, laughing and talking. The girl didn't look at them, sat up, patted the dust off her body, turned around and walked into the alley. The group of children obviously didn't want her to leave like this, so they sped up, ran over and surrounded her. She was about to walk out, but was suddenly pushed by an older child on the shoulder, causing her to fall to the ground. He Duanwu. Why didn't you clean the table today? Your family doesn't sell noodles." He Duanwu. I saw your father on the street today. The oldest of the children seemed to be 10 years old, and the youngest was only 5 or 6 years old. They were talking one after another. The girl got up from the ground and bit her lip. She wanted to get out of the crowd but was pushed back in. These years, the He family's life has not been too good. Elderly sighed and said, "Back then, young master and Miss He left the capital city and embarrassed the house of high dukes." Although the Li family has been declining, they still have a foundation in the capital city. They still have to be careful when they do things, but the He family is different. Miss He's father was already seriously ill, and he passed away after a few days. The He family's eldest son was already engaged, but due to the pressure from the house of high dukes, he quickly came to cancel the engagement. Your other aunt was also delayed for a few years before she was married, but she was sent back by her husband's family in less than 2 years. I'm afraid it's also because of the House of High Dukes. The old man sighed and continued. Fortunately, the He family is just a commoner, and the House of High Dukes won't use more underhanded methods to protect their reputation. The Li family can't help them openly, but they have helped them resolve a lot of trouble in the dark. It's good that young master goes to meet them, and they should know about Miss He's situation. There was an endless stream of people on the street. An elderly told Li Yi about these things in detail. Li Yi could still remember the face of the man who carried him everywhere to seek medical help on a snowy night. There was another figure in his mind that he could not see clearly, and that figure was the person closest to him in this world. Whether it was the Li family or the He family, there wasn't much of a difference in his heart. Their bodies had the same bloodline as this body, and it brought him an irreplaceable sense of closeness. This was something he couldn't feel from Rui and the others. Hey, there used to be a noodle stall here. Why isn't it here today? The chubby boy had been anticipating something along the way, and when he reached the corner of the street, he suddenly said in surprise. There was a hint of disappointment in his voice. He had planned to let his big brother see how delicious this noodle stall was, and also ask him to teach him martial arts. Now, it seemed that his wish had been temporarily dashed. Since yesterday, the chubby boy had obviously been pestering him, and this time, he even wanted to follow him out. Hearing his words, Li Yi raised his head and looked around. The place where he ate the noodles yesterday was empty. The woman and the little girl were gone. But thinking about what happened yesterday, it was normal that they didn't come out to set up a stall today. The mother and daughter looked quite pitiful. If possible, Li Yi wanted to buy the recipe for the noodle stall. Under normal circumstances, a few hundred taels of silver would be enough for a family of 5 to live comfortably for the rest of their lives, even if they ran out of money. One reason was because he really liked the taste of the noodle, and the reason why he was willing to spend several times the price of the noodle recipe was purely because he had an indescribable good impression of the little girl. Young master, the He family is in front. After turning a corner and walking a few dozen steps, Elderly pointed to a deep alley and said, the He family is in there. Even in the future, even in the most prosperous cities, there would still be old and run-down places, let alone in this era. In the capital, not only did the royal family and various officials and nobles live there were also poor families who could not eat their fill in the inner city of the capital. This was clearly a place similar to the slums. When Li Yi and the other two followed a narrow alley, the road ahead was blocked by a group of children. The alley was already narrow, and with 7 or 8 children surrounding it, there was no way to get through. Little beggar, your father doesn't want you anymore. What's that in your hand? Let us see. Let go. If you don't let go, I'll beat you. What are you doing? Seeing a young girl being pushed and shoved by them, Li quickly walked over and yelled, Come on, come on, come on. Seeing that someone had arrived, the naughty brats immediately scattered. The girl picked up a cloth bag from the ground. It had been accidentally dropped by them in the process of fighting over it. She patted the dust off it and carefully kept it in her bosom. Then, she raised her head to look at the figure walking over, and her small face couldn't help but be slightly startled. Li walked over and gently patted the dust off her body, and asked, Duan Wu, why are you here? Where's your mother? My family lives here, and my mother is at home brewing medicine for my grandmother. Seeing that big brother again, the little girl raised her head and said with a smile. With that, she suddenly tilted her head and watched as the little fatty stuffed a fragrant pastry into his mouth. The little fatty blushed under her gaze and handed over the paper bag in his hand, and asked, Do you want to eat? Duan Wu? As if remembering something, Li suddenly looked at her and asked, What's your surname? My surname is He Duan Wu. The little girl raised her head and looked at him with her large, bright eyes as she spoke in a small voice. Chapter 325. Mother, get up and drink your medicine. The woman in the coarse dress brought in a bowl of black medicine and walked to the bedside. She spoke softly to the old woman lying on the bed. Cough, cough. The old woman had a head full of white hair, and her face was full of wrinkles. She stared blankly in front of her, and tried to sit up. The woman hurriedly reached out her hand. "Where did you get the money to buy medicine?" The old woman grabbed the woman's hand and stared blankly at the door. At this moment, the woman could clearly see that there was no spirit in her eyes. She must have been blind for a long time. "Business has been good these days, so I saved some money." The woman placed the bowl of medicine next to the old woman's mouth and said. The old woman murmured, "What's the point of wasting this money? This old woman doesn't have many days left to live. It's better to save it for Duan Wu." "Mother, don't say these things anymore. Hurry up and drink your medicine." The woman sighed and urged. She glanced at a jar in the corner of the room. Buried under the jar was the silver that the young master gave her yesterday. After using that money to buy medicine for her mother, there was still more than 9 taels left. If she used it sparingly, it would be enough for a family for a few years. She must not let those people find it. Those 2 young masters were good people. Good people should be rewarded. She silently prayed in her heart that nothing bad would happen to them. The old woman silently drank the medicine. The woman picked up the bowl of medicine. Before she could put it down, a clear voice came from outside the door. "Mother, I'm back." Hearing the girl's voice, the woman's lips curled into a smile. Tomorrow, she would go out and buy a few feet of flowery cloth to make a new dress for Duan Wu. She had wanted a beautiful flowery dress for a long time. The little girl happily jumped into the room and stuffed a white thing into the woman's mouth. She happily asked, "Mother, is it sweet?" Before she could react, a few figures walked in from outside the door. The woman's expression changed and hurriedly protected the little girl behind her. Could it be that those people had come again? The first thing that came into view was an old face. The woman was slightly startled, and the vigilant expression on her face disappeared. All these years, every time they encountered a problem that they couldn't solve, this old man would appear. Although they had never talked to each other, she could roughly guess his origins. When another familiar face appeared before her eyes, she stood up immediately. Did someone come? The old woman couldn't see, but she could feel that there was an outsider in the house. From the looks of it, it didn't seem to be those villains who often came. Her son worked during the day, and only came back at night. She felt strange in her heart. How many years had it been since outsiders came to this house? After Li Yi entered the house, he looked around. It wasn't an exaggeration to use this phrase to describe a family with only 4 bare walls. Other than a stove and a bed, there was no other furniture. There were only 4 walls. The only bed was in the corner, and an old woman with white hair was lying on it. There was also a small room inside, separated by a curtain. Through the gap, one could see some clues. The space was not big, probably only enough for a bed. Benefactor. The woman hurriedly walked over, rubbing her hands. She seemed very nervous. If it wasn't for the young master in front of her, she wouldn't have the money to buy medicine for her mother. Those 10 taels of silver could be considered as the money to save their lives. "Auntie." Li looked at the woman and said. The woman was about to open her mouth to say something, but suddenly heard the young noble say something. She was startled. Her mouth opened halfway, and her expression became blank. "Yi family Xiaonyang's son." The old man with the surname Li took a step forward, looked at the woman and said, "This is your sister's child." "Jade Nyang, is Jade Nyang back? Where is Jade Nyang?" Before the woman could react, an anxious voice suddenly came from the room. The old woman was anxious to get off the bed. Because she couldn't see, she tripped and rolled off the bed, but she didn't care at all. She struggled in the direction of the door. "Mother!" the woman exclaimed and hurriedly ran over to help the old woman up. The old woman stared blankly at the direction of the door. 2 lines of tears rolled down from her empty eyes. She murmured, "My Jade Nyang, where is my Jade Nyang?" The little girl stood there blankly. She didn't know what had happened. It was the first time she saw her grandmother like this. Her face was pale and she didn't know what to do. "Grandmother, don't worry. Mother is not in the capital. I came this time to take you back." Li didn't know if the old woman would be able to take such a blow if he told her that the Jade Nyang she spoke of had already passed away over 10 years ago. At this time, he could only comfort her like this. As for the truth of the matter, it was better to tell her slowly. After seeing that they had lived in such a place all these years, he could guess what kind of hard life they had lived. Naturally, he couldn't ignore it. Just now, Li had already thought of taking them back to Qing and Fu. No matter how long the hands of the nobles in the capital stretched, they couldn't reach Qing and Fu. You are Jade Nyang's child? As if thinking of something, the old woman temporarily forgot about the matter of Jade Nyang. She grabbed Li Yi's hand and continuously rubbed her calloused and rough palm on his face. She murmured, Jade Nyang's child, my grandson, he is so handsome like Jade Nyang. As the old woman spoke, her voice gradually became softer. She tilted her head and let out a light snore. Great joy and great sorrow were the most hurtful. Li Yi hurriedly helped the old woman to the bed and had her lie flat. After covering her with the blanket, he turned his head and saw that the woman, who was his aunt, was looking at him with a complicated expression. Actually, when he found out that the little girl's name was He Duanwu, Li Yi understood where that familiar and intimate feeling came from. Because both of them had half of the He family's blood flowing in them. And the reason why he was familiar with the stall's noodles was probably because he had eaten it when he was young. Aunt Xiao, pack up. We'll leave today. From Uncle Li, he found out that the youngest daughter of the He family was called He Xiao. Li looked back at the old woman and said, Okay. Hearing Li Yi's unwavering tone, the old woman opened her mouth and finally spat out a word. Seeing that the little girl was standing there in a daze, Li Yi walked over and rubbed her little head. The old woman followed and looked at the little girl. She said, Duanwu, this is Big Brother. The little girl nodded mechanically and raised her head to look at Li Yi. Using a mosquito-like voice, she said, Big Brother. Her little brain still hadn't figured out what had happened, but she knew that this Big Brother was different from the one she had silently called out in her heart. Chapter 326. The old man had fallen into a deep sleep, and his aunt was packing up the house. Fatty Li Yingkai and Duanwu were sitting on a large rock by the door, showing off his treasured delicacies one by one. No one knew how many delicacies he had hidden in his clothes, and the fragrance of the delicacies drifted far away, attracting the attention of a few children who hid far away and swallowed their saliva. Come, don't be shy, eat. He generously pushed all the delicacies to Duanwu and patted his chest. I still have a lot at home. I'll treat you to even better food next time. After thinking for a bit, he added, but you also have to treat me to your family's noodles. The temptation of delicacies to children was not small. Finally, a little girl of about 7 or 8 years old slowly walked over. She pointed at a pastry in a paper bag and said, Little brother, can I eat this? A kind smile appeared on the fatty's face, and he straightforwardly said, Not giving. Seeing the little girl walk away with tears streaming down her face, the fatty's mouth twitched. The reason why he gave these delicacies to Duanwu was because she was his older brother's younger sister, which meant she was his younger sister. Don't think that he didn't see that Duanwu was the only one surrounded by people. She still wanted to ask him for food? In her dreams. Young master, shouldn't we discuss this matter with our family first? At the entrance, the old man surnamed Li looked at Li Yi and said with an awkward expression, Why should we discuss it? Li Yi looked at him and asked. Elderly sighed and said, These years the family has helped them a lot, but we never did it openly. Otherwise, it would cause the Chun family to be even more dissatisfied. Once they get serious, the He family will face even more trouble. If young master wants to bring them home, it is not impossible, but you should at least discuss it with the old madam or the second master. There are many people in the Li family who are still brooding over what happened in the past. If young master doesn't say anything, you will meet with a lot of resistance. Hearing this, Li shook his head and said, I'm not going to bring them back to the Li family. When the old man heard this, he was stunned. Just as he was about to ask, Li had already ordered the Li family guards to look for a palanquin on the street. As for the other guards, they walked into the alley and stood guard here. What's going on with the He family? I don't know. Why are there so many people? Is someone here to cause trouble again? Their family has always been very strange. Who knows what happened? But looking at them, are they moving? So what if they moved? I heard that the He family offended a powerful official in the capital. Didn't you see how they survived all these years? Even if they moved away, I'm afraid they will end up the same. People from the other families who lived in the same alley kept walking to the door. They looked in the direction of the He family's house, pointed at it, and discussed in low voices. Among them, a middle-aged woman wearing a coarse long skirt saw the scene in front of the He family's house. Her expression changed a few times, and she quietly walked out of the alley. At this time, Li and the two children were already walking on the street. Seeing the clothes that the little girl was wearing full of patches, Li frowned and decided to take her to the tailor's shop first. Because there was no uniform size system, there were no ready-made clothes on the street. Usually, clothes had to be tailored in advance. There were many clothes in the tailor's shop, and they were all custom-made. It wasn't difficult to find a suitable dress for the little girl. "Sir, this is a reservation by another customer, so it can't be sold. How about this? I'll first measure this little girl's size, then pick a piece of fabric that you're satisfied with. 2 days, just 2 days. You can come back to pick it up after 2 days. I guarantee that your clothes will be ready," the manager of the tailor's shop said with a troubled expression. However, the troubled expression on his face disappeared when he saw the ingot of silver on the table. "This dress looks really good on a little girl. There are a few other pieces here that are not bad either. Would young master like to take a look?" He wrapped the few pieces of clothing together and sent Li out the door with a fawning expression. "Take care, young master. You're welcome to come again next time." The distance between an ugly duckling and a white swan was actually only a piece of clothing. A new dress and a few suitable pieces of jewelry could complete the perfect transformation from a little beggar to a little princess. After coming out of the jewelry shop, Li pinched her little face and said, "You're too thin. You need to eat more in the future to gain weight." The little fatty expressed great agreement with this sentence. He patted his entire chest and said proudly, "That's right. You can only grow as strong as me by eating more." The little girl nodded and secretly decided that she definitely wouldn't eat more in the future. She held on to Li Yi's hand tightly, afraid that he would disappear the moment she let go, just like how he had suddenly appeared. If her brother disappeared, no one would buy new clothes and beautiful jewelry for her. Thinking of her appearance in the mirror just now, her heart was unprecedentedly happy. After renting a courtyard in an inn and paying the deposit, Li Yi returned to the streets with the two children. It was not suitable for them to live in the Li family, but if they lived outside, they would have to worry about the public house's revenge. They found someone on the street and asked for a certain address. They bought 2 dough figurines from a roadside stall, one for each child. The little fatty bit off the head of the dough figurine and muttered that there was not enough honey in the dough figurine, so it was tasteless. Li was thinking about something else. Because he had received a modern education, he had always thought that elopement was very romantic. Modern people pursued free love, and the story of elopement for love in ancient times was revered to a very high level. The story of Sima Xiangru and Zhuo Wenjun, a male phoenix seeking a female phoenix, was envied by many people. However, the reality was cruel. Sima Xiangru and Zhuo Wenjun had only been a couple since ancient times. In the end, Zhuo Wenjun had to sing, "I wish to find the one who loves me, and never part with me," to change Sima Xiangru's mind. Even so, it was a good ending. Li Yi had read through the criminal files of Anxi County. Due to elopement, the man's name was expelled from the clan, and the woman's life was forfeited. There were countless cases of elopement. Actually, the ending for his parents was not bad. After all, the two of them had escaped from the shackles of their families. Although their days in the Li family village were hard, they should still be very happy. He could feel this in his memory. However, in the distant capital, there were still some people who were suffering for them. Because of this, the Chen family and the Li family lost face, but it was still a small matter. What crime did the rest of the He family commit? Did they have to suffer 20 years of revenge? What did the young lady of the Chen family do to have her lifelong happiness destroyed just like that? Thinking of this, Li Yi could not even blame the Chen family too much. With his status, he naturally could not blame his parents. What a sin! Stories were all lies. He would never believe in romantic love stories again. Li Yi let out a long sigh in his heart and stopped thinking about this matter. At this time, they had already walked to the door of an imposing mansion. Stop! Who are you and what are you here for? The young gatekeeper was originally sitting on a chair and drinking tea leisurely. Seeing someone walk up the stairs, he immediately walked over. Please go in and inform them that the Crown Prince's friend is here. It was the first time that Li Yi had come to the Crown Prince's mansion. This gatekeeper was very unfamiliar and was not originally from Prince Ning's mansion. The gatekeeper glanced at the three of them. A young man with 2 children. What kind of strange combination was this? He did not even have a follower by his side, so he definitely did not have a noble identity. He claimed to be the Crown Prince's friend. The Crown Prince had only been in Jing for a few days, and the places he frequently went, other than the Imperial Palace, it was the Crown Prince's mansion. How could he have any friends? This guy, could he be pretending to be the Crown Prince's friend? After being a gatekeeper for so many years, he had some ability to see people. What kind of person was the Crown Prince? The friends that the Crown Prince knew were naturally not rich or noble. That kind of superior temperament could not be faked. The person in front of him, did he really think that by wearing decent clothes, he could pretend to be the Crown Prince's friend? Go, 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 go. The Crown Prince is very busy. How can he see just anyone? The gatekeeper impatiently waved his hand. There were countless people who wanted to visit the Crown Prince every day. If he went to bother the Crown Prince every time someone came, he would have packed up and left long ago. What's more, this guy did not even have the most basic greeting card. He lacked the most basic sincerity. Bastard, how can you say that? The young gatekeeper was about to go back and continue drinking tea. Before he could turn around, his butt was kicked by someone and he immediately rolled on the ground. Chapter 327. There were countless nobles in the capital, and the noble families were highly respected. Even the servants in the manors felt that they were a cut above others. The gatekeeper rolled on the ground from the kick, and his front teeth almost fell out. He was immediately enraged, and crawled up from the ground. Just as he was about to curse, his angry expression immediately turned into a flattering one. Bodyguard Lin, do you have any orders? Bodyguard Lin had followed the Crown Prince from Qing and Fu to the capital. Aside from the Crown Prince and his consort, he was the most powerful person in the manor. Even if the gatekeeper had 10 times the courage, he wouldn't dare to be presumptuous in front of Bodyguard Lin. Bodyguard Lin didn't pay any attention to the gatekeeper. He walked to Li Yi's side and smiled. Li, you came at the right time. His Highness has just returned from the palace, and has been waiting for you for a long time. Hearing Bodyguard Lin's words, the gatekeeper's legs almost gave way and he knelt on the ground. What kind of person would make the Crown Prince wait for so long? More importantly, he had actually stopped such a person at the door? It wasn't until the young man and the 2 children walked into the manor under Bodyguard Lin's guidance that the gatekeeper finally couldn't help but sit on the ground. Cold sweat poured from his forehead, and the bitter smile on his face was uglier than crying. This way. The Crown Prince's manor was very large, at least much larger than the Li family. Li Xian's head guard led the way while Li Yi brought the 2 children. After a quarter of an hour, they were still walking through the manor. He secretly calculated how much it would cost to buy such a large manor. According to the geographical location, it was almost within the first ring of the capital. What would the housing prices within the first ring of the capital be like in the future? If there really was such a large piece of land, the 18 generations of his descendants wouldn't have to worry about it. Little Fatty, who had always been bold, stopped talking after entering the Crown Prince's residence. After all, the environment he grew up in was not ordinary, so he naturally had more experience. He knew that the people who could live in such a place were much more powerful than the Li family. As for the little girl, Duan Wu, she held onto Li Yi's hand and looked around curiously. However, she felt that this place was really, really big. Her feet were a bit sore from walking, but she still hadn't walked out. The place they were moving to wasn't as big as this. On the grassy slope behind the Crown Prince's residence, The young guard carried a huge kite on his back. After a run-up, he rushed down the slope. Gradually, the tips of his feet began to leave the ground, and his entire body slowly rose into the air. When he was 2 zhang above the ground, he swung his arms and tilted his body, and the huge kite also tilted at an angle. Like a large bird, it began to hover in the air, attracting the cheers of the guards on the grassy slope. Patter! The fatty stared blankly at the scene. The pastry he had just taken out fell to the ground. His eyes were filled with fear as he pointed at the guard in the sky and shouted, He's flying. The little girl also widened her eyes and opened her mouth slightly, unable to say a word. It was as if the 2 children had seen a whole new world. They stood there in a daze, unable to move their feet. Li Yi had no choice but to walk over alone. How is it? Li Xian had a proud look on his face. He realized that not only could this thing prevent people from getting hurt when they jumped down from a high place, but it could also allow them to make a turn in the air with just a small change in angle. In his opinion, this was no different from a bird flying. Even the guards of the prince's residence didn't dare to jump down from a cliff that was dozens of zhang high. This kind of difficult operation was not something that a pig or a dog could do. When he developed the thing that could be carried on his back and jumped off the cliff, these guards would be able to charge higher into the sky. To be able to do this to this extent is already very good. Li Yi nodded and said, it was a tragedy for Li Xian to be born in this era, where science had not yet sprouted. If he was born a few hundred years later, perhaps the people who invented the airplane would be the Li brothers. So humans can really fly in the sky. If they can fly even higher, won't they really be no different from birds? Li Xian murmured. If they can fly even higher, then there will no longer be a need for mounted scouts on the battlefield, and there will no longer be any ambushes. The distribution of the enemy's forces, the amount of provisions, and the terrain of the battle will be clear at a glance from the sky. Li Yi patted Li Xian's shoulder and said, how is it? Do you feel that the responsibility on your shoulders has suddenly become heavier? Li Xian curled his lips indifferently and said, I just want to see them fly. As for how Uncle Huang wants to use them, that's his business. The guards in the sky were flying lower and lower. There were guards on the ground specifically recording the time and height of their flight. When Li Xian walked over, he suddenly froze and pointed at the little girl not far away. He turned to look at Li Yi and asked, why is she here? You can't really. She's still a child. Li Yi resisted the urge to say scram. He calmed himself down and said, that's my younger sister. The lady boss who sold noodles yesterday is my aunt. Li Xian took a long time to understand the ins and outs of the matter. He asked, you came to borrow people from me to protect their safety? Li Yi nodded. That's good. If Marquis Chen's mansion wants to deal with ordinary families, there are indeed many ways. You can use the guards of Crown Prince's mansion as you wish. They're all carefully selected by my father. With them around, there shouldn't be any problems. Li Xian added. Also, the man we met at the county office yesterday is the capital magistrate, Chen Yu. He's also from the Chen family. I think the Chen family is behind him to make things difficult for the mother and son. But don't worry about this. Uncle Huang doesn't like officials who bend the law for personal gain. Especially in a place like the capital. Chen Yu will be transferred to another province in 2 days. We don't know who the new capital magistrate will be, but it definitely won't be the surname Chen. After saying that, Li Xian went over to check his kite. Since Li Yi didn't intend to bring his mother's family to the Li family, he naturally wouldn't use the guards of the Li family. In the vast capital city, there were only 2 people he could absolutely trust. Mingzu lived in the palace, so he couldn't meet her at will. Li Yi didn't want to see her either, so Li Xian was the only one left. His straightforward attitude moved Li Yi quite a bit. Although he was a little silly sometimes, he was the kind of friend who could be relied on at critical times. Seeing Li Yi walking over to check the big kite, Li Yi waved to a guard. Go get a pen and paper. Although the guard didn't know why Li Yi wanted a pen and paper, he still followed his order and quickly brought it over. There was already pen and paper here. A table was placed on the grass, and it was filled with simple drawings. 2 guards directly carried the table over. Li Yi picked up the pen and quickly sketched on a blank piece of paper. Soon a bird-like object with long wings appeared on the paper. "What's this?" Li Xian walked over and asked with a puzzled look. "A glider. A glider." Li Xian was still a bit puzzled. "It can enable your guards to fly higher and farther." Having got a simple shape, Li started to mark the size. There were a few key parts that needed to be enlarged. Higher and farther. Hearing these words, Li Xian's eyes shone at once. On the top of a grassy slope not far away, the little fatty's eyes were full of admiration when he saw another person flying up with a big kite on his back. However, when he lowered his head and looked at his own body, his eyes dimmed. In a further place, a beautiful woman was standing on the bedside of a delicate attic. Hearing the cheers from the grassy slope, she lowered her head and added the last stroke to the picture on the table. In the picture, some weird kites were flying in the azure sky. Chapter 328. In the Ming dynasty of another world, there was also a man named Wan who had the dream of flying into the sky. He tied the rocket to a chair and wanted to fly to the moon to have intimate contact with Chang'e for the first time. Of course he failed and even lost his life. Obviously, Li Xian was much smarter than Wan Hu. He never risked his life. Instead, he just wanted to send his guards to the sky. However, based on his knowledge, it was as difficult as hell for him to realize this dream. His whole life was far from enough. What Li Yi could do for him was to guide him onto the right path and reduce the amount of time he would have to waste due to detours. The drawing he drew on the paper was the simplest and most primitive glider, which was so simple that it was not driven by power. Even so, it would take Li Xian a lot of time to make it. After selecting 6 guards and instructing them to follow Li Yi, Li Xian started to study the drawing carefully. It was better not to disturb him at this moment. Li Yi didn't bid farewell to him. Instead, he just left with the 2 kids silently. After passing through a long corridor, he bumped into some figures walking towards him. "Nice to meet you, princess." The guards behind her all bowed to her. Li Yi raised his head and saw a strange and beautiful woman. It should be the first time for him to see Li Xian's wife. Yesterday in the cold mountain temple, as she was wearing a mask, he didn't see her look clearly. When Li Xian was in Qingyun Prefecture, he once said that his fiancée was a first-class beauty in the world. Now that he met her, he knew that the rumor was true. The young woman in front of him not only had an outstanding look, but also faintly revealed an air of nobility that commoners didn't have. Undoubtedly, the temperament of the daughter of a big family had been fully revealed. Pitifully, it seemed that Li Xian had not been enlightened in this aspect. He didn't look like an experienced woman at all. For him, a drawing of a glider was far more attractive than an unparalleled beauty. "Greetings, Crown Prince Consort." In the end, the 2 of them were people from 2 different worlds. Li Yi cupped his hands together and spoke softly. After seeing the other party nod slightly, Li Yi took large strides forward. The woman looked deeply in the direction in which Li Yi had left and said softly, "Yanji, do you know that young man just now?" "Crown Princess, that is Li Yi Li. He is a friend of the Crown Prince from Qingyun Prefecture," a young girl beside her replied. She had originally been Ning Wangfei's personal servant girl. This time, when Wang Yi and Wang Fei had returned to Qingyunfu, they hadn't taken her with them. Now all of the internal affairs of the Shizifu were personally managed by her. "Oh, he's Li?" The woman looked back at the direction of the grassy slope, her eyelids slightly drooping. Her husband had always liked to study those strange things and never socialized with others, including herself. It was as if no one could integrate into his world. Except for that young man just now. The 2 of them did not talk much, but she had heard this name more than once. In this world, there should only be one person who could pat her husband's shoulder, right? She was really curious, what kind of person was he? Or rather, what kind of person was her husband? Li Yi quickly forgot about Li Xian's beautiful crown princess. He still had many things to do. For example, bringing his aunt and grandmother to the inn's small courtyard. The old lady seemed to be sick, and he needed to find a reliable doctor. After they went, did he need to buy some daily necessities? He didn't know if the inn would provide them. Of course, The most important thing was how he could explain to the old lady about his deceased mother. He had hoped for her for 20 years, but found out that his daughter had already passed away 10 years ago. It was said that the white-haired person had to send off the black-haired person, but what was even more tragic was that the white-haired person didn't even have the chance to send off the black-haired person. The old lady was already very pitiful. If she suffered such a blow again, it was hard to say if she could survive. But the truth couldn't be hidden. Li couldn't think of a good way along the way. When he walked back to the alley again, he heard a noise coming from inside. He walked in quickly and saw a few strange men lying in front of the He family's door, wailing incessantly. The guards of the Li family stood at the side and looked at them coldly. There were also many people watching from afar. What happened? Li walked over and asked. A guard came over and said, "Not long after young master left, these people appeared and wanted to stop us. Then we fought with them, and the result is like this." Obviously, although the guards of the Li family were not 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000, they had no problem dealing with a few street bullies. Li didn't even ask who ordered them to do this. Li Xian just told him that yesterday afternoon, the Chen family sent people to the Crown Prince's mansion to apologize, but they didn't even enter the gate of the Crown Prince's mansion. Now they couldn't even take care of themselves. These people should have been arranged by them before. Where are we going? The old lady had already woken up. She was helped out by Duanwu's mother. She murmured, "Did Lady Jade come to pick us up? Where is Lady Jade? Why didn't she come herself?" When the guards of the Li family helped her into the sedan chair, the wrinkles on the old lady's face smoothed out. The old lady had another son, who was Li Yi's uncle, who worked outside and went out early and came back late. Li Yi asked a guard of the Li family to wait here. When he came back, the guard would take him directly to the inn. After returning to the inn, Li Yi asked Uncle Li and the guards of the Li family to go back first. There would be no problem with the people of the Crown Prince's mansion here. Inside the room, Duanwu was carefully putting the delicacies that Brother Fatty had given her into the old lady's mouth. Li stood in the courtyard and looked at the peaceful scene in the room from afar. He finally realized that he had a few more relatives in this world. The woman named Hishio walked out of the room and came to Li Yi's side. She looked up at him and asked softly, "Child, tell Aunt your mother." Li Yi sighed and said softly, "My mother, she passed away more than 10 years ago." The woman's body trembled. Even though she had already guessed the truth, her face couldn't help but pale. Tears instantly rolled down her face. "This matter. Don't worry, I won't tell Mother." The woman wiped the corner of her eyes and said, "After sister passed away, Mother cried until her eyes went blind. For the past 20 years, she has been hoping for her to come back every day. Let's just hide it from her." Li Yi sighed again. He had always thought that crying until one's eyes went blind was just an exaggerated expression in literature. Only now did he realize that it was just his ignorance. Where's my grandson?" The voice of the old lady came from inside the room. Li Yi quickly walked in. Chapter 329. Dinner was sent over by the inn's waiter. The little fatty and Li Yi stayed for dinner. The little fatty, who had lived a luxurious life, clearly had little interest in the inn's food. Duanwu took the chicken leg that Li Yi had torn for her and gnawed on it. In the past, she rarely had the chance to eat meat. When her uncle came back from outside, he would occasionally bring her some small food, the kind that could be bought with 2 copper coins. That was her happiest moment. During dinner, Li chatted with the old man for a while, trying to avoid mentioning his late mother. The old man had no objection to moving his family to Qing'an Prefecture. Home was only where there was family. After suffering for so many years in the capital, there wasn't much he missed here. Originally, he had been intentionally or unintentionally asking about Li Yi's mother. After hearing that Li Yi had a family, the old man's attention was diverted. He was clearly excited, and his empty eyes seemed to glow again. "Come to think of it, you're going to be crowned soon. You should hurry up and carry on the family line." The old man repeatedly said this during dinner. Speaking of this topic, Li Yi could only smile bitterly. If it wasn't for the matter in the capital, he would have started this great task a long time ago. After dinner and drinking medicine, the old man fell into a deep sleep. Li looked at the sky. He had been busy the whole day, and it was time to go back. He left a few dozen taels of silver for Duanwu's mother to keep in case he needed it. Walking out the door, he saw a few guards of the Crown Prince's manor standing in the yard. "I'll have to trouble you for the next few days." Li walked over and saluted them with his hands folded in front of his chest. "You're welcome, Li." The leading guard smiled and said, "Don't worry with us here, there won't be any problems." As for the ability of the guards of the Crown Prince's manor, Li was very confident. He didn't say much more. After waving goodbye to Duanwu, who had walked him to the door, he took the little fatty back to the Li family. He had just come out of the inn with the little fatty and the two guards of the Li family. When they were walking on the street, someone walked toward them. "Excuse me, young master. My master invites you to the Golden Phoenix Pavilion for a chat." A young man dressed like a manservant approached Huang Xiaolong with a faint smile. Li Yi asked doubtfully, "Can you tell me who your master is?" "Young master, you'll know when you get there." The manservant was obviously unwilling to reveal the other party's identity. "Then I won't go." Li Yi simply turned around and left. He did not have many friends in the capital. Obviously, the other party could not be Li Xian or Emingzu. Of course, it could not be the old monk that he just met. Since they weren't even friends, what was the point of chatting? The manservant didn't expect Li Yi to refuse so straightforwardly. He was a little anxious as he stepped forward and said, "Young master, please wait." The two guards of the Li family stood on either side of Li Yi. If the person in front of them made any moves, they would immediately arrest him. "Young master, my master does not have any ill intentions," the manservant quickly explained. He took out an item from his sleeve and said, "Please take a look at this." Li took a step back vigilantly. What if the thing this fellow took out from his sleeve was the pear blossom storm needle, or the flying goose arrow, and he was caught off guard? Wouldn't he die a wrongful death? Fortunately, the manservant didn't have such thoughts. The thing he took out was a handkerchief. The handkerchief looked old. The corners were slightly yellowed, and two mandarin ducks were embroidered on the handkerchief. The person who embroidered this handkerchief was obviously an expert in needlework. Li Yi had received many handkerchiefs before, and the one in his hand was the most exquisite. The expressions of the two guards of the Li family clearly didn't look right. They looked at Li Yi with admiration and envy. A woman giving a man a handkerchief, what else could it mean? Now she even dared to invite him. What was this young master waiting for? They didn't expect that he had only been in the capital for 2 short days, and a woman had fallen in love with him. It seemed that they had greatly underestimated this young master, who had just returned to the Li family. The confusion on Li Yi's face deepened. If this was in Qing'an Prefecture, it wouldn't be strange at all. But this was the capital. How could someone know him? Moreover, the handkerchief was usually given to a woman. Who would give an old handkerchief? Looking at the age of this handkerchief, it would take at least 10 years to achieve this effect. "You can't have mistaken me for someone else, right?" Li Yi asked the manservant. "Young master, is your surname Li?" The manservant also looked at Li Yi suspiciously. Yes, he was almost the same as the portrait he had seen. The only thing he couldn't figure out was that this young master seemed to be a little too young. However, the portrait couldn't be wrong. After seeing Huang Xiaolong nod his head, the manservant didn't have any more doubts. Since young master's surname is Li, there can't be any mistake. The manservant said with absolute certainty, "You two bring Inkai back first." Li Yi instructed the two guards. He still decided to go and take a look. The reason why he didn't need the two guards to follow him was because with their fighting strength, they definitely wouldn't be able to handle something that even he couldn't. Moreover, Golden Phoenix restaurant was just across the street. Nighttime was the time when the restaurant's business was at its peak. With so many people coming and going, there wouldn't be any problems. The two guards naturally wouldn't delay their young master's appointment with a beauty. They forcefully dragged the little fatty away. "Young master, please." The manservant smiled and made an inviting gesture. "Wait a moment." Li still felt that it wasn't safe. He called for two guards from the Crown Prince's residence. There was nothing wrong with being more cautious. What if there really was a woman with bad intentions and coveted his beauty? If there were more people with his mediocre martial arts, he wouldn't be able to resist. Li Yi remembered that there was a brothel called Golden Phoenix Restaurant in Qing'an Prefecture. The top courtesan there had even gifted him a handkerchief. But here, Golden Phoenix Restaurant was really just a restaurant. The restaurant's business was very good. The lobby downstairs was filled with customers. Li Yi followed the manservant up to the second floor. The manservant didn't seem to mind the two strangers following behind Li Yi, as if he really didn't have any ill intentions. "Young master, my master is inside. You can go in by yourself." After leading Li Yi and the others to a quiet room at the end of the corridor, the manservant immediately retreated. Li Yi didn't know what was going on. He lightly knocked on the door. "Come in." A gentle female voice came from inside the room. There seemed to be a slight tremble in the voice, but Li Yi wasn't sure if it was a misperception. The door was unlatched. After pushing the door open, Li Yi hesitated for a moment before stepping in. "You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."